everybody doing tonight? If you're feeling good, make some noise. If you're happy to be alive, just put a hand in the air. Glad that everybody has a hand in the air. I would have been worried. My name is Baxter Wordsworth. This is the poet. Sometimes I feel like I'm Andre 3000. When I come around, son, ask where's my album. Some say took a vow of silence like devout monks. Some bang on my old sounds like some loud drums. Wow, proud to announce new music coming out, starting from the bottom, building from the ground up. Yo, yelling cowabunga when I crowd surf. No, before I crowd run, I'd rather couch surf from the underground dirt. Sowing seeds, growing stems, leaves through the semen of your town church. Worship the pen that scribbles a blissful hymn. Great universal verses, my girl was a crystal gem. Kiss amber, smoke amethyst rock, some hot like the candle wicks mixed with sick cancer sticks. Rain, sleet, inhale, exhale, chemtrails posted on the corner moving letters like exhale. Put your hands up high if you feel the vibe. This is the Poet Will Be Televised. It's all honest, I ain't telling no lies. Welcome, the Poet Will Be Televised. That's right, oh good, you're feeling alive. This is the Poet Will Be Televised. This is the Poet Will Be Televised. Make sure you tag the list if you wanna rock. If you had a bad feeling, well it's bound to dissolve. Me, I just found profound new resolve. That's right, I'll be down for the cause. Can you please give this band a freaking round of applause? They dope as shit though. Switch it up like a schizo. It was like your Baxter. You know you gon' rock it from the top, from the get-go. I was like, yeah, let your mama and them kids know. They was like he jumping, like he skip rope. And it's just getting.
All right. How y'all doing today? This is the Poet Podcast with Dale Novella. I'm your host, Dale Novella, and we are on Skye's Crescent Radio. Today I have a great panel, and we're going to come together, listen to some amazing poetry, but also talk about some stuff that's happening that's been in the forefront of everybody's mind, specifically around policing in the United States, and especially with brown and black communities. So let's introduce our wonderful panel. I'm going to start at the bottom, according to my screen, with Mr. Jason Marshall, who is a wonderful musician, Grammy winner, just beautiful black man in general. You have like everyone here has a long resume, and I'm like, I already know because I didn't write anything down. That I'm gonna forget half the stuff everyone's done. So I'm sorry, but Jason, what you got going on? Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. what do I have going on?
Yes.
Surviving this moment like everybody else is what I got going
Yes.
on. I tell people I'm a student of the universe trying to do my homework. That's it. That's it. And just trying to survive this round of attrition because it's picking off a lot of fruit out the tree. So I'm just trying to, stay rooted while all of that's going on. So I practice music. I exercise. I try and sleep as much as possible. I try and drink as much water as I can every day. Trying to avoid the news feed. Stay stay reading some kind of book. And just know that this is a moment like every other moment. So there'll be something on the other side of that, and I'm just trying to be ready for it.
That's good advice. I know you like cycling. Have you been able to cycle this?
Yeah. So I do. I ride my bike. Most of my workouts are indoors right now, especially with the weather. But weather permitting, I'm riding. My metrics are like 10 hours a week. 10 hours a week of training, and that ends up being about between 200 and 300 miles a week under normal circumstances. Because I don't own a car, so I'm commuting and doing all of running errands and all that kind of stuff in addition to working out and competing and so forth. So I do that. I run, so I'm training about 10 hours a week doing that between gym work and running. And my new addition is yoga. I've been on it for a while, but I'm trying to work up to 7 hours a week. And just trying to set an example for whoever might need one, that wellness is all we got. So that's what I'm focused on. Yeah. And I practice music. I can count on one hand the amount of gigs I did last year. And that's not to say I wasn't busy with it, but certainly the rhythm of it is different now,
Yeah.
And I recognize that the music is just one of those things that without most people knowing about it, music is one of those things that make people feel human. And so the few times that I was able to perform, it was always a quite not necessarily from me, but people, they would come up crying, and just thanking me, and just because they hadn't heard music, and it, especially in New York, they took it for granted. And so I'm just trying to honor the vocation and the lifestyle that a musician, as far as the music goes. I don't know about the rest of the lifestyle, but in terms of the music, just really trying to be a professional and honor the vocation of music for sure.
Yeah. Thank you for reminding us of all of that, Jason. I feel so grounded now. Just like, you're right.
I feel like I get back to work.
Yeah. It's like I'm a yoga instructor and don't do 7 hours of yoga.
Just trying to get good at it. That's all.
Yeah. So thank you for being here, Jason. Let's move on to our next guest, Baxter Wordsworth, who is a regular panelist on the Poet Podcast and also the host of The Poet Will Be Televised. So you just heard his voice on our theme song. He's also the host of End of the Week Open Mic and MC Challenge. And he is a wonderful MC. I always poke fun at him and call him a clown. He's not a clown, but he's very funny. And he's a manager of baristas now.
Yes, I am.
How are you doing, Baxter?
I'm doing pretty lovely. It's a lovely snowy afternoon. The snow is very active, but I'm inside, so I can't complain.
Nice. What do you have going on? Anything exciting? Anything not exciting?
Tonight, February 7th, happy birthday, Jay Dilla. Happy birthday, Bob Marley. I will be competing in an in-house MC challenge for End of the Week. For people who don't know what End of the Week is, it's the longest running hip-hop weekly hip-hop open mic showcase in New York City. It was weekly, it's not anymore. We've transitioned to the Zoom world, like most things have. We held this event called the MC Challenge. It's 5-round competition. Olympic style. In each round, MCs have to do a different thing. We're doing an in-house version of it, so everybody that's in it is somebody who helps facilitate the whole situation. So very, very versed on verses, and I'll be competing in that, probably winning it if you ask me. But who knows?
Whoa.
Who knows?
Dama got something to say about that.
I mean,
I'm sure.
I'm sure a lot of them got something to say about it, but we'll see how it turns out in the end.
Well, if you're competing, who's hosting?
Big Zoo. Zoo,
okay.
founder of End of the Week and one of the best freestyle MCs on the planet, I would say. But yeah, so that's going on. Other than that, same old, managing coffee shops and working on raps.
Nice. How's the in-home studio situation, engineering situation? Because you were trying to get on the come up with that.
I had a birthday recently. I'm
yeah, you did.
older. And for my birthday, my lovely lady got me this because I'm building a home studio situation. So she got me some decor for it. If you don't know, there is a group called Black Star, which consists of Mos Def and Talib Kweli. There's an album they put out, and on that album, there's a song called Thieves in the Night. Mos Def verse on that song is my favorite verse of all time. And you probably can't see, so I'll put it a little closer. But that circle in the middle is the lyrics to that verse written out.
Nice.
Beautiful.
All the way around. It's in this lovely brushed metal frame, and it's for that studio situation that I'm working on. So it's
Did she tell you that was brushed metal, or you just you already knew that term?
I know brushed metal when I see it.
Yeah, you're right.
Baxter, you're so fancy.
Sometimes. But yeah. So things are coming along. I'm excited.
Awesome. I'm excited for you. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me, as always.
And we're kind of twinsies. We both have on white hoodies, but not your official Poet Will Be Televised hoodie.
Oh, but let me shout out to Fresh Daily. Fresh Daily has a clothing line called Very Relaxed.
Ooh.
And these are his hoodies. They are pretty pricey at $100, but this shit is quality. I'm very relaxed. I recommend it.
Nice. All right. So thank you once again, Baxter. And going to our next guest, Miss Kristin R. Jordan. And I'm sorry, actually, I've never asked anyone on this program about their pronouns, but if I mispronoun you, please let me know. But Kristin R. Jordan is here, and she is a poet and a teacher and a all-around good person, but she is at the forefront. She is running as a representative for District 9 in New York City, which represents Harlem. I actually don't know which part of Harlem. West Harlem, right?
We're Central Harlem.
Oh, Central Harlem. Nice. Yeah. So Kristin has a lot going on. Why did you tell us about it?
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Dale. No, it's all good. It's all good. So we're, District 9, we're Central Harlem. So basically, if you take the map of Manhattan and you look at Central Park and the top 110 of Central Park, and then draw lines going straight up, that block right there is us. So we are the heart of Harlem. I'm third generation from Harlem myself. And I got into the race because our current city councilman voted for de Blasio's jail expansion plan. So for anyone who doesn't know what that is, it is this idea that we're going to close Rikers by building new borough jails. And for me, I was just like, I don't care if there's mayoral pressure, and I don't care if every other district or mostly white districts are voting for this mess, but Central Harlem votes no on new jails. There's no way we're going to continue the criminalization of our community. So that happened in 2019 and got me fired up enough to get in the race. And I come at it really as an organizer and activist and lover of Harlem, not as anyone with machine or political experience. But I think that's perfectly fine, because I think the experience we need is more of organizer, activist experience, survivor experience, connection to the community experience, as opposed to political machine experience anyway. I'm also a creative, which makes me a very different type of candidate. And I think it's really a shame we don't see more creatives in the political space, because clearly we need creative solutions, and clearly the politics is a mess. And a lot of us who are creatives are also very politically aware and activists. So I think there's more room for connection there than we ever like really make credit for. Like, why do politicians have to be lawyers? Why? Or businessmen? Why? Right? Why
Yeah.
can't politicians come from the art space? I think
Yeah.
we would see a lot better policy solutions. So
I 100% agree. And you, as not only a creative, but as a third generation Harlemite, you have that passion, and we do need community representation. People should be represented by people who understand their interests. So yeah, I think that's awesome.
yeah, and we definitely don't need new jails. Definitely don't need new jails.
Thank you so much for being here. I'm really excited to get into conversation with you. And we'll move on to our next panelist. So this person is very close to me, both geographically and, metaphorically. Yeah,
Physically, spiritually, emotionally, and any
yeah,
other type of
all that.
Cosmically,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's what I meant.
Literally.
like,
Literally,
Literally.
and
just say we close.
we close.
There we go.
So he is an art educator, he is a MC, he is a hip hop historian, he is a lover of all things black and savior of black children, black and brown children, world traveler, the wonderful and iconic Mikal Amin.
Hey,
How are
hey.
you today?
I'm good. All of these titles you always give me, I think the one I feel the most pressure about is just savior of children. I'm like, yo,
Big,
it's like I try.
Big
like,
job.
like I'm failing them badly.
big. Yeah.
Oh man.
I know some people who would heavily disagree with you.
Yeah. Anyway, whatever. Yes. That's
What
the
you
one I'm
got
just
going
like,
on?
what do I got going on? What don't I have going on? Well, I'm really excited because sometime this month, I will have my first published scholarly paper in the review of education, pedagogy, and cultural studies. I was a part of a research team at Columbia University for 7 years as a hip hop facilitator, working with high school students in a program called Ciphers for Justice. So hip hop practices pedagogy is my contribution to that research, looking at how the practice of hip hop in and of itself is its own way of learning and teaching. So traditionally in hip hop education, there's aspects of those things that they talk about and discuss. But when we think about hip hop and education, we think about it as a mnemonic device, a way to memorize things and recall things, other subjects, or we're looking at largely sort of like the cultural aesthetic things, but the art and practice of it, much similar to someone who trains like Jason does in jazz or a classical musician. There's an actual process of learning and developing just from simply doing those particular things. So in essence, you can teach young people in a myriad of ways just by simply having them write a rap verse. And it's not just about writing a rap verse for ELA or anything like that, but it is literally the holistic process of creation that has all of these other life youth development things. So I kind of touch upon that, and that's going to get published this month. I also took on an opportunity to be an associate editor at Words, Beats, and Life, which is the oldest and longest running independent hip hop scholarly peer reviewed journal. It's based in Washington, D.C. It is international. And my special project is I actually was published in this journal in 2015 for the Brazil issue. I've toured and performed and taught in Brazil twice. So they asked me to co-curate with DJ Painter from DC a Brazil hip hop mixtape. So I'm basically taking you, it's funny you calling me hip hop historian. We're going to take you from the very beginnings of hip hop in Brazil. So some old school Brazilian hip hop from like the early 90s, late 80s, all the way through the current permutation of what hip hop sounds like in Brazil. So Dale knows, one of my favorite places on the planet has been Bahia. And Brazil in general. I've been fortunate enough to visit the South and the North. So I'm really excited about that. I also have a song featured on there because I've done an album in Brazil, the first Portuguese and English language hip hop album that I did in 2009. So I got a track actually from my homies that I'm featured on. So I'm excited about that. Working on a couple of music projects as best I can, kind of similar to what Jason was saying. It's very different so much as an MC is about performing for me. Trying to understand how to get the right feel, even just the technical part of it in a Zoom space has really just kind of been, for lack of a better term, a learning curve for me. I'm still trying to figure out how to best make it work. But it doesn't stop me from writing. I was really excited about some dope projects upcoming. I'm not going to say too much about that because I have so many and I'm not sure exactly which ones are going to come first. Originally, I was doing a color album that I thought was going to come first. Dale and I were basically doing sort of like a double disc type of project that's still in the works from her color challenge or chakra challenge that she was doing earlier in the pandemic. And I'm also working on an album called Emertica, which is as it sounds, it's my personal kind of indictment on what's going on, not just since the pandemic, but for period. And the single COVID-16 I dropped actually later in the pandemic, like, what was it, Dale, like early fall?
Yeah, I think it was like September or something like that. And all the proceeds from that song go to a different charity. Each month after Bandcamp Day, you donate those proceeds to the proceeds from the previous month to a new organization. So
right, yeah. So that's
saving even more people, not just the babies.
Trying. So yeah, that's and obviously Dale and I have moved.
Yeah,
we are in a much more.
Well, not obviously. There's a podcast, right? So some people are just listening to our voices. Besides, like the studio,
Just true. You're right.
Studio behind me.
You're right. You're right.
It's Funkadelic Studios, so
you're
not
right.
necessarily our studio.
You're right. Well, I always feel like we kind of at home in the podcast anyway. I forget that there's millions of people out there that are potentially listening to us. So, but yeah, so that's kind of been in the thing this week, and that's about it for me. But I just have to say, because I'm semi-fanning out, I'm just going to go out and say I am super happy to have Jason back on the podcast. Because he's actually the true, very smart brother.
Oh man,
on some realness.
Oh man, I appreciate you, man.
Yeah, shade, no shade, but yeah, no, I'm you got me on my toes already when you was like, student of the universe doing home. I'm like, let me go. I gotta look at my notes.
Let me go through my books.
Let me go. I gotta get back on this grind. Hold on, man. So I'm excited today.
Thank you, Mikal, for being here. Thank you for letting us know what you're getting into. And I'm going to introduce our producer, Miss Jade Zabric, who is a wonderful guitarist and musician and songwriter, and also the creator of Skye's Crescent Radio, which we are broadcasting from today and will be and premiere every month on their YouTube page. So everyone go subscribe to Skye's Crescent Radio on YouTube. And also sign up for email updates and so on and so forth. Jade, what you got going on?
I'm just recording a lot lately and getting back into it. I've actually gotten kind of good on this thing lately, and I'm going to change my style a little bit, but I'm also graduating this May, so I'll finally have my bachelor's. That's what I'm working on. Yeah.
Congratulations,
Jade.
Yes, very dope, very dope, very dope.
And Jade is not a fan of talking on the mic, but I always appreciate when she does. So thank you. She's like, I'm back on mute now. All right. And then there's me. So Mikal usually like interrupts me and is like, before we move to the next video, we need to introduce the host.
You see where my hand is with the mic to make sure.
Okay.
On she making it sound like she tries to skip herself on purpose. So, as she's graciously done, our moderator, host, founder, organizer, sole controller of this particular universe, amazing singer, songwriter, producer, engineer, home decorator, homemaker, cat whisperer, educator, my co-savior of the babies, because she teaches as much as me, if not more. At this point, there's not really much she doesn't do. The most beautiful and very attractive Miss Dale Novella, what are you up to when you're not sleeping?
When I'm not sleeping,
which is about 2 hours a night.
Yeah. I just try. Yeah, I try to survive, man. I really have been rethinking and reconnecting with my why, and why I do everything, why I do the Poet podcast, why I do the Poet Will Be Televised, why I make music. And it's all the same thing, like just trying to create these communities and these platforms where people, brown and black people, feel heard, where they can come and feel a sense of community, where we all learn and express different wellness techniques. So just like every little thing that I'm doing, just trying to keep that at the forefront. And I've been, I guess, realigning, you know, and I think it's going well. More and more opportunities seem to pop up, including our new apartment, which I wanted an apartment where I could see the water. So I look out the window, I see the Hudson River. We have a space that's just the studio space, right? Been doing more yoga. I've been meeting more musicians and singers who want to learn more about yoga, including Mr. Jason Marshall, and so on and so forth. I think, you know, we're gonna keep rocking. I got a couple songs coming out. I'm really looking forward to this song I'm featured on by Lex Rush. Our video should be premiering within the next couple months, so I'm excited for everyone to see it. I've been writing a lot with other songwriters for other artists, which I've always wanted to do, so that's exciting. And just like being really just really trying to get everything together. That's what I've been planning, yeah, and surviving. So thank you for asking, Mikal Amin. So we're going to get into our first video before we get into this deep conversation. This is actually the first podcast in which I took questions directly from audience members. Usually our questions come from our videos, but I took the questions first and then tried to find videos that kind of like complemented those questions. So we will get into our first video from Queen's Mind.
The word peace for Mark for death. You have already convicted me, sentenced me to the death penalty before I've been charged, before I've been booked. No judge, no jury, no judicial system. Your gun the judge, your bullets the jury, your hatred the only charge. No, not guilty. I didn't deprive you of melanin, of carbon, didn't plant that seed deep within your generation's past of false supremacy. Didn't cause you to grow up thinking you deserve to hurt or rule over another human being. Or surely you know all living things have a right to this earth. As I didn't cause you to hate you, but I say unto you, we are not guilty. Black lives matter, but you have melanin marked for death. Should I die? Should my life be taken? Just because I've been taught the wrong decision making? Because I am a descendant of who you label slave. Brainwashed to believe my sun-kissed skin is a curse. Now my body belongs in a hearse, so y'all blame me. But I'm just a product of my environment. An experimental project y'all gave my people to live in. Placing liquor stores on every corner. Bringing in crack, sending in AIDS and subliminal messages that show me I'm nothing. Every channel on TV show how lovely it is not to be black. And each weapon of mind destruction turns into lack of self-esteem. So my feelings of inadequacy got me mad as hell. So hell yeah, if I hate myself, then caps get peeled, niggas get killed like I know better. I'm marked for death. As I see these cops killing my people, hands up took their last breath. This system never neglects to take my people down. Like, really, how do guns and drugs get in the hood? Well, y'all just blame me anyway, like I'm in shipping and receiving, and y'all got people believing I'm a bad seed, so y'all mark me. Target on fabricated gangsters that only click up because our father's not home and welfare said he couldn't live here. Plus, y'all made sure he had a felony, so he definitely can't live with me. So I grow alone, no dad the groom, and mom, I don't know. Damn. She fucked up. Tricking off what she learned from those before she's sick. Thinking she needs money for fake ass nails and weave and shit. All she wanna do is smoke weed, get high so she can numb her deceived heart. See, she was white deep down too. Then her son wouldn't be marked for death. And she ain't thinking about buying me no bulletproof vest. She'd rather get another tattoo on her chest now. Back to this. Y'all say I should be held accountable for my own actions, but I'm mad vexed. What kind of life is this? That I have to live ashamed of my own God-given skin, but you expect me to walk around skipping, innocent and happy with my childhood, my manhood. I gotta take care of my sister, and we all got issues. But my issues don't give you the right to take my life whenever you feel like it. You got me marked for death. when your policies got me like this. So go ahead and start your race war so you can implement your martial law. And all we do is hands up, don't shoot. I can't breathe. Dang, turn me loose from your hand. I only have Skittles and iced tea. It's a toy gun I just whistled, and which is all brown till you see. We are all Trayvon. We are all Martin. We are all Malcolm. We are every ancestor lynched, and we are not guilty. But you have us marked for death. Queen's mind. Thank you.
And she was just talking about her experience, like with policing in her neighborhood, right? So my question is, in your experience, how have the police played a part in systematic racism? And for anyone listening who may not know what systematic racism is, or I think it's a buzzword that everyone has probably heard it at this point, hopefully. But in case you don't really know what the difference is between racism, systematic racism, you're like, I don't believe that that's real. The definition is institutional racism or systematic racism also is a form of racism that is embedded as normal practice within society or an organization. It can lead to such issues as discrimination in criminal justice, employment, housing, healthcare, political power, and education, among other issues. So how do you believe, in your experience, have you seen that? And do you have facts that support that it wasn't just in your head? And this is one of the questions from the audience.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
I mean, so, before I get into any anecdotal things, I would just find it fascinating how, like, America at large, or people who don't believe in systematic racism, think that collectively all of these black people are just coming up with this idea that police are racist, like, on our own, but we all just happen to have the same idea. But first, let me say that this is definitely anecdotal, but this is what I always tell people. Like, I didn't hate the cops when I was younger. You know what I'm saying? Like, I didn't have any animosity towards the cops when I was a child. I thought the cops were heroes. I have a very specific story and when the cops were like, saved me, like, when I was like 4 or 5 years old, right? But when I reached my young adulthood, when I reached my teenage years, the cops made it very clear that we were enemies. They made it clear to me that we were enemies. I've never sold drugs. I don't involve myself in any like criminal or gang activities, but I was treated just like anybody who did. I was routinely, me and my friends would drive around listening to music. We were stopped and illegally searched multiple times. Every interaction, or most of the ones that I remember that I had with the cops, was not courteous. They didn't treat me with any sort of like courtesy or anything that you would afford authority figure interacting with a civilian. It was hostile from their end, like from the jump. So, like, I have to believe in institutional racism because I've experienced it very consecutively ever since I came into like my adulthood.
Thank you for sharing that.
I'm just going to say word and double word, but I actually, it's funny, looking at these questions and, I have the cheat code of living with the moderator. So like we've had discussions all week about this, and I'm all I'll say is this, similar to Baxter, full disclosure, my mother served as an administrator within the New Jersey correctional system for over 30 years. At one point in my own life, I had chosen to actually become a police officer and then later a lawyer. Thankfully, I rethought both of those decisions by the time I'd gotten to college. And in large part due to some of the treatment that I experienced myself as a young man, also my father. My father was stopped as a supposed routine traffic stop that supposedly he was inebriated. I don't know how the state trooper could determine that on the highway. He was not speeding, he was not swerving, but what he did see, we come to find out, was that my father is an alpha. My father's a proud alpha, A Phi A, and he has on his license plate the Alpha Phi Alpha, like sort of like the thing you hold your license plates with. Yeah. So when he was pulled over, my father was forced to recite the Greek alphabet frontwards and backwards to prove that he was not inebriated after the normal stuff.
Most alphas can't even do that.
Yeah,
I mean, after a while, yeah, like you
my
kind of
father's a
forget. You're
teacher,
like, I
too.
don't need to know it. Nobody gonna like
Right.
run up on me. After
Wow.
like
Right.
2 years, it kind of just like.
Well, I'll
flows down your
say
brain.
this. I'll say this in shouts to my pops. One, he's also a teacher, and then two, if anybody who knows my father, this is early on too when he was, because he pledged late. He pledged
Yeah.
postgraduate.
After the fact, yeah, okay.
He's a big fan of this stuff. So I mean, I remember he has his board. He used to hang up all this stuff. So he's an alpha. Like he loves that. So he was in it. But I, as a 16-year-old, was stopped similarly. But I want to kind of really quickly kind of go from this more from a historical standpoint to think about the systemic racism side. So what people don't realize and understand is that in the United States, and actually all of the things that I have, these are links that I have, and I'm very happy to share them with everyone or have them also being posted so you can see where this information comes from. I'm a big believer in factual information, historical information. I don't consider myself, and Dale calls me historian, I kind of call myself a fan of history. So, because historian is a very deep thing. But with all of that said, Dr. Gary Potter from Eastern Kentucky University did a history of policing in the United States. And in it, what he really categorizes is how the police come to be. In England is where we originated and get this from, which was a community night watch, which effectively was funded by the elite rich. You can search all of this information. This is all factual and documented. Dr. Potter's study is only one of many, but I chose this one in particular. And what we see is two different types of manifestations once it hits the States. In the North, ironically, it was called the Night Watch. In a similar vein, it was meant for the elite, the rich, for their property to be protected and to maintain vagrancy laws, largely that were religiously based. However, in the 17th and 18th century in the South, concurrently, there was what we know as the slave patrols. These are the foundations of the modern police. The first actual official municipality that was basically funded by the state or by us citizens was in Boston, I believe in 1833, then in New York, 1844, and in Philadelphia in 1856. Ironically enough, when you think about and you look at some of the strongest police unions in the country, those are the three cities where it's the strongest: Philadelphia, New York, and Boston. This is where policing, as we understand it, originates. Their sole purpose from the very beginning was to protect wealthy property and to hunt, track, and arrest Black people.
Property.
Correct.
Because we were considered property. We were not human beings at that point.
Right. So from its very inception, the concept of a policeman was not to protect and serve a particular community from a violent element.
I mean, it's
all
still
people.
not, but yeah.
But I'm just saying it's sort of like
sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. You're
no,
absolutely right.
Yeah, no, I listen. I know I'm saying chapter and verse for some people on here, and please, chime in if there's more that I'm missing or adding. But I wanted to approach it from this standpoint because I to your point, Baxter, there's this idea like, oh, systemic racism, that's not a thing. But when you really study the story of how our country's created and founded, it's very clear that these results sort of emerge. So even when you think about how police ticket you for traffic violations, or when we think about the broken window policies that New York City has had, these are all things when you look at the root cause and who they actually benefit the most. It is not the average citizen, but essentially wealthy landowners.
I mean,
to maintain that supremacy.
Right. It's just like in New York City. Like we've all of us were artists and things like that. Like I say this all the time, and I know it's anecdotal again, but like every young white person that was involved with music that I knew always had drugs on them at all times. Like, you know what I'm saying? Always. Like, most of them sold it, right? The young Black musicians and the young Black people do not, because we get stopped and they don't. And that's just what it boils down to, Like if the cops really wanted to make a bunch of drugs bust, all they would have to do is go down to Wall Street and start stopping, frisking stockbrokers and things like that. They fill their quota for the month and a day. But
Yep.
like, you know, like you say, like that was never the intent. It's like if the police, if policing was meant to serve and protect, if it was really a service, then you should be able to stop a police officer and ask for a ride home or some shit like that. But that would never happen because they're not here to serve you. They're not. You know what I'm saying? In any extent of the word. Another anecdotal thing is like I remember once I was young, and this is like where my whole fucking shit changed. I was young. I went to go visit a friend of mine who had just came home from college. She lived in East New York, right? I was driving at the time, so I drove up to her house, and she had came outside to say hello, right? So to greet me. So, but when we went to go back inside, she had locked herself out, like, and she was in like basketball shorts and like flip flops, and it was snowing outside, much like it is today, right? So it's like, damn, like, what are we gonna do? So me being the problem solver that I am, is like, yo, I'll go around the back. There's a fire escape, and I'll get into your apartment through the window, right? You know what I'm saying? And it's like, and after I do that, make sure you always keep your windows locked because that means people can do that, right? I fucked up though. So like in Brooklyn, as you know, there's usually a flight of steps before you get to the door at most of the brownstones, right? So like the first floor is the second floor, you know, and then the
Right.
basement floor. I miscounted and I went to the wrong window. So a woman saw me and obviously she was freaked out. Obviously she's gonna call the cops. Bet. That all makes sense. So I'm talking to my friend. We finally get back into the apartment. Well, I'm talking to my friend and I'm like, yo, I should probably leave. And she was like, no, just we'll explain what happened when they get here and it'll be fine. And I'm like, okay, yeah, cool. Maybe like that'll make sense. The cops came. We waited for the cops. We explained everything that happened. They fucking arrested me anyway, threw me in the back of the car. The chief comes over. He looks in the back of the car. Also, I forgot to say, my hair was braided and I was in the middle of taking my hair out. So like half my hair was out, but like whatever. The chief looks in the back of the car. He goes, oh yeah, that's a crackhead, and walks away. And like, yo, fam, I am the farthest thing from a crackhead. All you would have to do is speak to me. Like, you know what I'm saying? I was on my way from work. I'm driving a car. I just got paid that day. Like, there's so many things, but it's like to them, I was a young black kid with half of his hair out. I'm a crackhead. That's it. Like, you know? And it's like, damn, yo, like, there's nothing, and to rub salt in the wound, like the cops are like driving me to this fucking station, and I'm conversing with them, and by the end of the ride, I had them convinced that like I wasn't fucking a crackhead because I'm not a fucking crackhead. But it doesn't matter at that point. Like I'm in the system, I get fingerprinted, I'm processed, and all that, all because I'm young and black. If I was like a blonde white girl and explained that same thing, I'd have been fine. They'd have been like, oh, like we understand. You got a bright future ahead of you, kid. Like, you know, who's that dude that literally raped a woman and they didn't throw him in the jail because the judge. Yes, Brock or some shit like that. But
of course, his name is Brock. If it wasn't Brock, it'd be like
something.
whatever.
But the judge literally says, "Oh, he has a bright future ahead of him," and that's the part of it that frustrates me because it's what you say, Mikal. It's like if you do any amount of superficial research, if you cared for the truth and not just for like how you feel about it, it's obvious that institutional racism exists. It's not hidden. It's not like you don't have to do that deep of a dive for it. You look at any of the statistics, it shows it exists. You read any paper by any expert on the subject, and it shows it exists. You talk to anybody, even for the anecdotal stuff, and it's obvious it exists. So people who don't believe it exists just don't want to believe it exists. And I feel like I've taken up too much time, but thanks.
Well, I was just going to end.
Kristen seemed like she had something to say.
Yeah.
If I could chime in though, I appreciate the conversation, and I really like that Mikal brought up history. And I'll just throw out there that one of my favorite books on the subject is called Our Enemies in Blue by Christian Williams. And it talks about that legacy of cops being rooted in slave patrols. And so as we've been saying, I mean, the evidence is obvious. I think those who disagree, it's not, unfortunately, I think at this point, it's not so much from a place of ignorance as it is just from a place of hatred and white supremacy. But I wanted to say that I really appreciated the sister's poem because what she talked about was that feeling of being already convicted. And I'm not sure we touch on it enough, but our children and even us as adults sometimes walk around with these feelings of worthlessness because that is what this system tells us as Black people. And that's what I took from the poem, this feeling of of being trash, because in this system we are seen as trash and our lives are not valued. And so then that leads to a whole bunch of other things. So in terms of my personal lived experience, I would say that for me it's resonated in just being in New York and being here in Harlem and seeing the police presence, and then going downtown and seeing a totally different story in terms of police presence. Being on the Upper East Side, you see a totally different story in terms of police presence. And all of that has to do, it's very racialized, you know? And then anecdotally, I I've been I was falsely arrested 3 years ago. So I've been arrested and I've been behind bars, and the level of dehumanization, I mean, it's unreal. I mean, you are literally treated like trash. And I was not guilty, but what if I was? You know, Baxter was saying, oh, well, he's not a crackhead. So what if you were? People are still human beings. When do we get to treat people like human beings? So this is what I have to say about the criminal justice system and the racism in it.
Thank you.
Oh, sure. All of that.
Yeah.
all of that.
I was going to say something, but Mikal, you seem like you had a thought to finish. So I didn't want to cut you off.
No. I mean, I think when I was thinking about the question, I just simply, and I brought those things up just to simply say that the second part of it with police and how do they contribute to systemic racism, it's simply by being involved in how the structure works, because we understand that their purpose originates from these sort of racist ideas, and that hasn't really deviated too much. Agreed. So it's because of their involvement. So you can have cops that are like, for example, my father had a police officer drive him to his dialysis during a snowstorm. He called the police and they actually showed up.
Wow.
And drove him. Wow. So that's a great citizen cop. That is wonderful. Right. And I'm grateful that he did that.
Sure.
That does not excuse him, however, from other things that he has to do in his job description, based on exactly. And I think that's the key thing, because we don't want to necessarily villainize individuals, but we do want to understand that they contribute to something that is heinous. Yeah, and I think that's the discussion that we're trying to get to, is how to get rid of that structure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really appreciate that, because we often wind up in these debates about individual cases or individual cops, and it is important, and you know, cops are accountable for their actions individually, but it is important for us to realize that at the core, it's not about individual cops.
Yeah, right. I just wanted to chime in here because I think one of the things that gets left out of this discussion is how tied to, you know, sort of the American identity all of this is. And what I found is that when we talk about policing, we think of it as objectionable, like, you know, us here, we might object to it because of what has happened in our lives.
Yeah.
But you know, we're coastals. You understand what I'm saying? And so the whole middle of the country has a totally different view on what this is. And I found that in most of, like, if you, like, I would argue 15, 20% of Black people are not even, like, against policing in the classical sense of the word. Because
that's a low estimate, brother. I'd say higher.
Okay, all right. I'm just thinking, like, so if you look at Black people in America over 50, if you look at Black immigrants as in general, if you look at immigrants, period, like, America works a certain way, right? So if you are not exceptionally well versed in lots of things, if you're here, you're kind of pro-police by default.
Yeah.
Right. And it's not because you're a intrinsically heinous person. You just, you're an American, and
that's
America,
the culture. Yeah.
that's the culture. So you are pro, sort of governance by force, okay? And for most of America, policing is not something that happens to you. So it's easy to stand on that square and say, well, if they wouldn't do this, it wouldn't happen to them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Because it will always be something that happens to somebody else.
Yep.
Right. And, popular culture, Black popular culture is an increasingly diverse thing, quite disconnected from what happens when you interface with police. Because people from other countries, from other Black countries, just wouldn't come here if they thought they was going to get treated like we get treated.
Right.
Yeah.
Because it's not even an upgrade from wherever else you're coming from. Like nobody is going to uproot their life to go get enslaved or worse. Right.
Right.
So I think it's important to remember this is a quite fringe position on a very popular topic.
Yeah.
And so if it's policing, if it's military, if it's the correctional apparatus, all of that is America trademark, right? And so you come to America because you think that those things collectively, especially in a place like New York, those things collectively mean America, exceptional, like all of those kind of buzzwords. And for me, I'm gathering where most of us are in the same age bracket. I just know that my folks are from Texas, Florida, and Louisiana. And it was called the law. It wasn't called police because you didn't want anybody from the law in your space for any reason.
Mm-hmm.
Like I was told that one of my grade school teachers who I kept in touch with, we were the first generation not to learn to call the police. And the thing about policing is that you can only really learn what police actually do from the people that those kinds of things happen to.
Right. It's not theoretical.
It's not theoretical at all. But the people who make laws, the people who formulate policy, the people who legislate this stuff only interact with it theoretically.
Right. Yeah, I was about to say for
So,
them it is theoretical.
Yeah,
right.
It's just numbers and profit and models and all of those kinds of things.
And then it gets further it's made further complex by the Venn diagram of the racial structure of it, but also the financial structure of it, like the societal structure of it. Because like you could be rich and Black and experience policing very different than somebody who's poor and Black. You could be poor and white and experience it different than somebody who's like
it depends on that one.
But what I'm saying is like it doesn't remove the systemic racial aspect of policing, but it is very different, right? You know what I'm saying? Like money does afford you some protection in some way, even if you're the wrong color, right? Like a rich Black person definitely is afforded things that a poor Black person isn't, and just the same way as a poor white person. But what we're talking about is the racial component of the system. You know what I'm saying? Like the system has a racial component in it that even supersedes money at times, right?
Yeah. Well.
So if a police officer doesn't recognize you as someone of affluence, then you aren't protected by it. If a police officer doesn't recognize you as somebody, because even like Chris Rock will get pulled over, until they realize he's Chris Rock, and then it's like, oh, go on with your day, Chris Rock. Like
I was actually going to bring up something from the Obama presidency. One of the first major instances of race and hold on.
No, you're right.
I was just thank you, Jason. That's what I was going to bring up. Skip Gates, a man who basically, similar to your story, Bax, basically was entering his home on the Harvard campus. And he I forget what happened. He either lost his keys or misplaced his keys. And he had another way of getting in. Someone called the police.
His neighbor.
And then the police, and then the police effectively did not believe he lived there, even after him generating ID. Right. This led to a national.
They didn't recognize his affluence.
Right,
like in that situation, he wasn't protected by his assumed status, right? Like
in Massachusetts.
Come on.
The oldest police
I mean,
in
Ti
the
couldn't get
country.
into his building complex because he didn't have his whatever credentials he needed. You know what I'm saying? And but that's the systemic part of it, is the fact that like you can be protected by money, but that money has to be recognized by the authority, right? If they don't recognize it, if they don't see you as being whoever it is that you might be, then it doesn't matter. You know, you're still.
And that goes into stereotyping an entire community, right? And let's hear what Osiris Anthem has to say about the Black community.
My rhythm is off. My bad. Do it! I said, we don't got diplomatic immunity. This is a Black community. Food deserts and true peasants. Dudes make chicken by chopping a few pheasants, and I'm 1 degree separate, but it's hard to tell the difference from your neck of the woods. I mean, you good inside the suburbs on the Yukon, behind the forest with a current butler, not from Yukon. Husky with a lazy eye. That's the only Chris that we acknowledge, trying to take care of my BI. Young Valletta Wallace. It's hard to find your function. Seems we only hit the target when we shopping on the junction. What's the topic of discussion? Well, my homie's trying to raise a daughter, and she ain't even his, but he gives her every quarter, and for 3 months, my neighbors had a toilet out of order, and Flint, Michigan still got Clark Kent's favorite water. And all of my young boys who used to be adorable, now they grown, gangbanging, and got their own daughters too. My neighborhood's awkward, boo, might as well work for animal rescue, cause you might catch a stray just walking through. There's awesome dudes, intelligent women, and generous elders. It wasn't y'all, it was the system that failed us, the blind leading to death. No jewels, no math, nor tiny tips to back us like Iggy Azalea. Make capital down under if you can, bruh. It's not Sydney, Australia. So I like that bar a lot. So boom, I said make capital down under if you can, bruh. It's not Sydney, Australia. What's the capital of Australia? No, it's not Sydney. It's a place called Canberra. So yeah. Make capital down under if you can, bruh. It's not Sydney, Australia. The stress will cause our kidneys to fail. It's a scary sight. In your 20s or your 30s on dialysis. God at least help us with these challenges. I'm speaking from the advantages of people who unique and know they talented, but work throughout the week until their feet develop calluses, or can't get out the street because they need a sense of family, or emotionally depleted and can't seem to find a balance. Before I leave, I say, yo, R.I.P. to that Santana kid. I'm Mr. B playing Pure Release. This is some classic shit. It's for release Lil Reese and that boy Chief Keef. Chirac is wild. God keep those streets. I swear, some of these boys need a father. It can make a king cold if he never sees his papa, because until our final form, we'll be in the mirror looking for clues in the reflection like Kanika's mama during the Freezer saga. Would have been cooler if the brother just chilled out, worked it out with moms to find something we could build about, but everything is real now. That's life. Niggas talk about community, but don't even raise their kids, right? Right. I'm sure you had your reasons. Wasn't ready to be a father, just wanted credit for hitting some pieces. I remember you hit me up when I was 21 though. Tried to reconnect and sent me $50 or so. But I don't need your money, brother. Watch me triumph in this shit, being a bastard. Watch me triumph in this shit, being a bastard. Set me to be the Osiris in this shit. Worry about my second childhood. I seen niggas in third. Yakking like they 12. I swear these pigs is herbs. The hate is harder to manage. Old heads online sending me subs, trying to tempt the kid like Jared, but ironically the catch is I'm a predator and the son of an editor, and very reverent to the rebels that I'm descended from, raised around some aliens from places you call shitholes. How they feel about Castro depends upon their skin tone. Keep my eyes wide at all times like a fish, so the only time I blink is when I'm headed to the gym, yo. I get it how I live though. I ain't scared of death and worry about not seeing my goals before the Reaper connects. The scariest hours of the day are when I lay down to rest. And if you listening and you feel the same, then God bless.
So that was Osiris Anthem, who is usually raps. I think he started as a spoken word artist, and Baxter was like, hey, yo, you need to rap, B. And then he was like,
shout out to Nicholas Brooklyn.
Yeah, shout out to Nicholas Brooklyn. Yeah, so he describes his community, some of the problems that he sees in his community. And we were talking about community right before we broke out to that video. So do you believe that, I'm about to bounce around my questions a little bit. Do you believe that culture plays a role in the amount of crime in Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities?
I don't think you can answer. I'm sorry. Go ahead. I cut you off. I'm sorry.
That's the question. Do you believe culture plays a role in that, in the amount of crime in Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities? Personally, I feel like when the system, or when law enforcement is looking for certain things, they're going to find certain things. And that's with any of us. If I'm looking for cookies, I'm gonna find some cookies. Like, so if we have like a whole bunch of cops in one neighborhood and they're looking for
crime.
yeah, they're looking for crime, or looking for things that can be perceived as crime, like Baxter trying to get into his friend's apartment, then there's going to be more crime. Like, but if there's not as many people, is not as many law enforcement in different communities, and they're not looking for it, if I'm in the Upper West Side, I just don't see the amount of cops, or the Upper East Side, more like, I just don't see the amount of cops that I see in Flatbush.
So I definitely agree with that. I think, our neighborhoods are over policed, so they find more crime because they are there and looking for it and hunting for it. But I mean, can we challenge the premise of the question though?
That's what I was getting ready to do. Go ahead.
I found it very problematic. I found the question to be probably, no offense. I mean,
don't be offended. Like I said, all these questions came from the audience.
Yeah,
so
I was
like,
gonna say,
this is a
Kristin,
question that I thought we should talk about.
Yo, low-key, Kristin. Yeah, we had a discussion on this. So go in.
Yeah, but I was not feeling the question because the very premise of it, it's this idea that somehow we are at fault for the harm that has been placed on us by the police state, which is just completely inaccurate, And so I just didn't like that premise. What do you mean by crime? Like, the fact is, we've been the crime. We are seen as the crime, right? So it's not like, oh, this is the culture and somehow our investment in culture has caused crime. It's like, no, like, we have actually been the crime. Our culture has been criminalized. Black people have been criminalized. It's like Du Bois said, like what is it to be a problem? Like, we've been America's problem. So I think I just found the whole question be pretty on its face, like an issue, because what we've developed is a culture and a spirit in resistance and response to systemic white supremacy. And, how do you place any fault or blame on that? And how do we even look at these definitions of crime when they are just seeped in white supremacy?
Thank you.
I find that, I was getting ready to say most of the same thing, so I'm happy to hear you say it. The thing about a lot of this is that it sort of defaults to whatever white people decide is reality, right?
Yes.
So when we talk about what constitutes criminality, it's basically whatever white folks are not doing in that moment. And
yes, yes.
And so, like, if January 6th wasn't full of criminality, then I don't know what crime is. Yeah. Because most of them didn't even get arrested. And like, I'm from DC, right? Mm-hmm. So while, yes, that is a public space, DC is a collection of places, and you're not supposed to be able to run up on any of them, right? At all. And it's just layers and layers and layers of security, right? Yep. So when we talk about crime, I could forgive somebody for not even knowing what crime is based on what the media shows, in terms of the behavior of your average person. Mm-hmm. And then further, what I find so confusing about this is that white supremacy is a very brown thing now, right? It's not just white people, because you have people that act as proxies for white supremacy in the absence of white people.
Systemic.
Wow.
Can I just say the head of the Proud Boys, the leading current white supremacist group, is headed by an Afro-Cuban from Florida.
Okay. My point,
like Osiris said, depends on their skin tone.
So let me finish this.
No, continue.
I'm worried I'm gonna forget. Our cultures have been of survival, mm-hmm. and I see what gets criminalized is our methods of survival.
Yes,
right. Because see, we don't have social capital to really and the social capital point is why I don't like to call it a black and brown problem or things that happen to people of color, because every other person of color has social capital that Black Americans don't have. Like you come from a place, there's a language, there's a culture, there's a geopolitical affinity that we don't have. And because we lack that social capital, things can happen to us that can't happen to anyone else, right? Like I know cops who say, look, man, if I pull over a Black person and I see their name got 17 letters in it, I'm gonna do everything I can to not have a consulate get involved, because I don't want none of that. Yeah, I got a quota for the end of the month, but there's Black people everywhere. I can just find somebody else, right? So how our survival mechanisms get criminalized. I mean, it goes back to, like you mentioned, vagrancy laws. Vagrants are simply human beings trying to survive their circumstance.
Yeah.
And in most cases, the crime is standing still. Okay? Standing still.
In the wrong place. You can't stand still here. Gotta go stand still someplace else.
Yeah.
If you follow police code, they can effectively arrest you for anything. You know,
they do.
Yeah, and this is what I meant
literally
by
do.
the crime. That's exactly.
Yeah, right, exactly. But I'm saying that there's not a way to be.
Yeah.
So this notion that we are intrinsically criminal in our daily existence, and we are only outside of the correctional environment by the grace of God. Like that whole thing is problematic, but it is reflective of what is kind of thought about us. You understand? Like, and so when we talk about when you mention indigenous communities, I'm like, man, if cops existed in the profusion, if cops occupied indigenous communities the way they occupied Black communities, there wouldn't be an indigenous people. There just wouldn't be, because it's like cops are stationed at playgrounds with kids who are too small to even climb up into the squad car. I mean, everywhere in Harlem. And it's not about us committing crimes. I mean, you can get arrested for sleeping on a park bench. You can get arrested for not having property. You get arrested for anything. So, the way with, go ahead.
I said, yeah, and people are.
Yeah.
All
the time.
I mean, I live in sight of your district. So like inside of Marcus Garvey. Yeah. So I know, like I'm here, and the park is 1 avenue away from a precinct and 1 avenue away from 2 methadone clinics.
With an interesting statue by that precinct as well.
A statue?
Yeah, they got isn't that the one on 125th with the Rosa? No. Is it Rosa Parks? Okay.
No, it's Harriet Tubman.
Harriet Tubman, right.
Oh, you're talking about that one. Yeah.
It's a story about that statue, because when it was initially designed, it was supposed to be Harriet Tubman carrying her rifle, and she was actually facing the police precinct.
That would have been even better.
That design got killed. So
yeah.
Can I have that on the t-shirt?
I have a slightly different perspective of this whole thing. But also I want to say, the Adam Clayton Powell statue is one of the most like fucking cinematic statues I've ever seen in my life. Anyway, but I have a slightly different perspective on this. Like, while I don't have anything against what has been said previously, I do think it's a very complicated like situation that Black people find ourselves in, right? Because like we are attacked on one level, like Black people are the only people in this country whose progress is deliberately opposed. Like, you know what I'm saying? Which like a lot of other cultures, that's why America is such a beautiful place for people to come, because you can come here and work hard and build something of yourself, right? Like other cultures do it all the time, but when Black people have done it, like in Tulsa, Oklahoma, or like with the Black Panther Party, or like with Fred Hampton, whenever we work towards whenever
Yeah.
we
Move,
work
yeah.
to right or move, whenever we work towards our own progress or our or moving up a station collectively, it is deliberately and violently opposed by institutions and systems, usually backed by the government, right?
Yeah.
So like it has us in this weird position because like if you want to ask if Black culture has components of criminality in its culture, I'm going to say yes. Yes, it does. I know so many criminals in my family, all around me. I know people who probably carry guns and do harm for people. Like I know these people, like, you know what I'm saying? Because I grew up around them and seen it. The gun violence in the communities that I frequent and aware is a common occurrence. But there's a reason that these things happen. It's because these communities have been preyed upon, and it's like you guys say
It's
that
a reaction.
it's
to the
a
systematic racism.
like a lot of this is built in survival, but then they're overly policed, right? But then that's why I do have an issue with like this idea of defunding the police, right? Like, yes, I do think funds need to be allocated more towards the solution than the punishment. I'm 100% with that. I do not want to live in a community where there is no police, not
Why?
at all.
Yeah.
Like, you know,
So-
Why?
because
I
like
definitely
because
did-
I don't know what I'm gonna do about the violence that I see. So I'll put it to you like this. Very recently, there was a story, and I think this happened in Harlem. There was a woman who was coming home.
Oh,
and she
from
was
the liquor store?
She was
She got
no,
beat
no,
up?
not that one.
Oh,
This is
okay.
different.
Go ahead, sorry.
She was groped by a man outside of her building. She
Okay.
goes inside and she tells her fiance, "Yo, this guy outside groped me." Right? What do you do in that situation? Right? He goes outside to confront the guy with her. Right? He goes out to confront him. The guy starts shooting from outside the building, murders her, she's dead, and shoots him, and he's wounded. And now they're looking for the guy, right? And then I put myself in these situations, and I'm like, what would I do if my fiance comes and says she was groped by this guy right outside the building? I might do the same thing this guy did and go to try to confront or like talk like even maybe I even want to just like talk to him and be like, yo, man, what the like, you know, whatever. But if this person is like, if he has so little to live for that he's willing to shoot a man and a woman in the lobby of their building, like that's an issue for police. That's an issue that I should be able to call somebody and be like, there is a, like, you know, this is happening. And maybe it doesn't need to exist the way that it does. I don't know if it needs to be like, obviously there's systemic racism involved in policing. So I don't even trust calling the police. I'm just like, oh, I'm just stuck in this situation. Like that's how I feel about it. But like, I feel like there should be some authority that works inside of communities and with communities to mediate these situations, right? You know what I'm saying? Like what but yeah.
Mikal Amin, sorry. Mikal Amin has been unusually quiet. What do you think?
I'm just letting everybody speak because
Thank you.
all I'm just trying to anything I'm about to say is just putting gloss on the shine that's already here. So
Yeah, I mean, right. Yeah.
Go ahead, man.
I appreciate all of your opinions. I'm really happy that like, and if any question makes you uncomfortable, it's there because these are things that are uncomfortable for all of us to talk about. But I felt like we needed to, because there was like, I had like 25 questions that came from both liberal and conservative audience members. So.
Well, I just wanted to, you know, at the very beginning, I just wanted to kind of tap into what Kristin and both Jason said, because I too, when I was talking with Dale about these questions, I had some serious concerns about the tenor and the tone of the questions. I just wanted to deconstruct that just a little bit. First and foremost, one, there is an assumption that we are a monolithic culture. So we can start there. And the assumptions are made that essentially, if we are Black and brown, then we all espouse to the same ideas and philosophies. And Jason pointed that out in question one, thinking about how individuals that come to this country have a very different disposition in terms of how they see themselves, how they view things, et cetera, et cetera. But you can break that down also by demographic of part of the country. Like you said, we're coastals, ain't the same as in the Deep South, ain't the same as the Midwest, ain't even really the same as the New England Northeast.
Absolutely.
There's all of these different things. But even on a micro level, let's even go a little bit further. We live in Flatbush, Brooklyn, or we did live in Flatbush, Brooklyn. Really is kind of the reason why Brooklyn is called the planet, because of Flatbush. There is something along the kins of, I think, 100 to 200 different languages spoken in Flatbush by itself. When you think about Black people and you think about our culture, there's no way that you can tie it to any one particular thing. Further, going to culture deconstructed even further, this question supposes that Black, brown individuals, because I get the inference, this is a hip hop question to me. When we think about Black and brown culture and criminality, it's a buzzword. It's a dog whistle for simply talking about, well, if you're Black, then you listen to rap music. If you're in the urban environment, that is what you must espouse to. And thus what I see on a TV is drug dealers and thugs and et cetera, et cetera. Jason will well know this as a jazz musician 60 years ago, that would have been the Hep Cats. That would have been the Beats. Right. The drug dealers, the heroin addicts, et cetera, et cetera.
Poets.
Yeah, the poets.
Exactly. Yeah. We have in America this very contradictory idea, because when you think of Walter White, massive drug dealer, he's lionized, he's iconic. When we think Breaking Bad, you don't look at them as a criminal
Sopranos.
person. Right. Again, we can go on and on and on and on again. So what you really have here is inherent in the question, and this opposing of culture is a racist, hateful construct. You might not have meant to be racist, whoever asked that question, but fundamentally, when you start to break those things down, it's a hard question to even entertain, because one, it assumes that there's only one type of culture, and it also assumes that the only type of quote unquote activity, if we want to call it criminal, because I am definitely in agreement with you, Jason, everything that we're talking about, be it vagrancy, even drug dealing, when you essentially take the resources out of a particular community and they actually have to feed themselves, there's a myth that has been created around drug dealing. When we think of people like Frank Lucas, when we think about people like Al Poe, all these people were the Black version of the Italian and German mobs in the turning of the century. And this is my biggest issue. I think people need to be more fans of history to understand.
Can I ask you, like, well, what about the obvious, like, problem with gun violence in, like, Brooklyn and Chicago?
I got that for you. And I hear you and feel you. As someone who has had his apartment robbed, as someone who has been witness in our own building to separate violent murders from the place that we moved from, and who is not a gun owner and nor wants to necessarily own a gun, although I'm beginning to more think that might have to be a reality.
I'm still trying to convince him, but it's okay.
You don't have to give me that hard, but I'm just saying, like, I am someone, I say this to people all the time, I am not a pacifist. I'm not, but I'm also not an aggressor. I will fight and defend mine, but I'm not really here to go to et cetera, et cetera. But the point being is, Baxter, we are not equipped as individuals nor communities to handle issues of conflict. And you're right, we are so far down the road as a society to the point where the mutation of violence and conflict is beyond the ability for the community to respond to. My answer would be, what we have to do is we have to scale everything back. When we have a community that's considered of a collective whole, if you can get to that place and start from there, you have a chance to not be in a situation where you have to have a very aggressive, violent authority to deal with a potentially aggressive, violent threat. Why? Because when you look at most violent crimes, many of those things are because of what Jason was talking about earlier, and I know this is what Kristin deals with in politics, the ability of scarcity. When someone has and you do not, then you are moved, regardless of being Black, brown, red, white, blue, purple, periwinkle. You will move to violence to secure what you do not have. When you look at most of these things, you don't even have to think about it on a financial level. You can think about it on a level in terms of what we're talking about, power dynamics with gender. When you think about sexual assaults or rape, it is something that you want, someone has, you feel that it is necessary for you to take. These are things based on an idea of scarcity. We're so far down the road, it is hard for the average person to imagine a way in which we could deal with one another, to resolve conflict, to speak through things, to have a level of accountability to one another so that we could actively and collectively hold people in a space where there's certain things they cannot do. But honestly, I'd say, and this is me, I'd say 80% of this shit would get handled if you would redistribute wealth across a more equitable lines, because then there would be absolutely no need. And people could do the research. I came here ready for some police race stuff, but I got class receipts too. We can do that all day. To be honest with you, I'm going to say this to you, Dale, and I'm going to sign off. I've actually been chomping at the bit. I actually would love to actually have a discussion, a live discussion with individuals that kind of hold these views, because I would love for them to submit more than anecdotal, more than emotional arguments, which have their place. I'm about facts, figures, and function. Let's do it and let's rock. Because historically speaking, statistically speaking, and I got more stuff for these other questions, it's a myth. These things are myths and falsehoods. So when you talk about culture, these are dog whistles for racist ideas and attitudes that, quite frankly, with all the respect, I'm not talking specifically about the people that submitted these questions, but when you see that, it's a cowardly mindset because you do not have the actual information and data to back up these claims, to take someone's humanity away. Because that's what this is about. It's sort of saying, hey, do you think that your inhuman nature is the reason why these things happen to you? Because look at what you practice. But we're not practicing anything that white communities don't practice. Scratch race. We're not practicing anything that humans don't practice. This is what humans practice.
Survival.
Survival. So it's sort of like, well, where are you getting this from? You're assuming that if I'm Black, I'm a hip hop artist. I'm a Black man. I grew up in a suburban area, but as Dale knows, most of my family is literally from Newark, the biggest hood in New Jersey. All of my family on my father's side is from that. And I got drug dealers, drug addicts, thieves, all types of stuff, all up in my family tree for various means and reasons. None of those things that I ascribe to. None of those things I ascribe to. So, but again, I think there's not an immediate answer. I think we have a necessary. I'm in agreeing with you to the point, Baxter, of I think we have a necessary evil for the police, and the answer is basically we need a reset on modern society. I don't know if we're ever going to see that in a peaceful way, but that's the only way. As we've constructed communities and societies as it is, we only have the ability to respond violently and aggressively, but it's not the answer. The answer is we have to figure out a way to get to a collective whole to solve a lot of those things. And that collective whole is both financial, it is both spiritual, it is both physical. There's so many things that have to change.
Well, I know Kristin has been holding a comment.
Go ahead.
Kristin, what would you like to say?
Sorry,
no worries.
Well, I mean, I appreciate a lot of what Mikal just said, because I was going to say some similar things in terms of how we collectively see each other and the idea of being human and whole. I am someone who calls for defunding. I call for that as a political candidate. I say it openly. The ideal NYPD budget would be zero. The ideal incarceration budget would be zero. And the reason I say that is because we need to start taking these steps towards a different type of world. And I understand that reality is like super removed from where we are right now. And it's very hard for people to see like a world without violence, right? But when I talk about abolition, that's what I'm talking about. And like when I talk about defunding, that's what I'm talking about. I am not talking about unfettered violence in the streets. I'm talking about moving towards a world without violence. And I do feel the effects of violence, and I'm going to use violence instead of crime, because I do think crime is very politically charged and very, very subjective, what we're calling crime. But you know, in terms of violence, I mean, I'm a survivor of sexual assault. I'm a survivor of domestic violence. I'm also a survivor of false arrest. And, you know, I wish I could say my position was unique, but it's not. And a lot of women in my community understand what I'm saying when I talk about being stuck, like literally being stuck, and being in a place of fear of interpersonal violence or gendered violence, and also being in a place of fear from the systemic violence and the police violence, because all of that is happening. And I think what we have to realize is that we can't respond to the interpersonal violence with more violence, that we are not actually going to solve the problem, right? I mean, we're what, a month outside MLK, right? So yeah. Like King already told us, like responding to violence with violence only multiplies violence, adding darkness to a night already devoid of stars, right? So we are like finding these violent situations and then responding with additional police violence. And that's not getting at the root of solving the problem. So I understand where we are, and I am not saying we erase all of the cops tomorrow, but I also do see the possibility of an existence of a world without cops. And for those who don't see that, I would ask, like, where is your faith? You know, where is your belief in something different from what we currently see? Because the current reality does not have to be our reality.
Yeah. So with all of that said, there was another question submitted by the same person who submitted the last question that wanted your opinion on the Ferguson effect, quote unquote, the Ferguson effect. And for anyone who does not know what that was, because I had to Google it too, it is, I just had it up. It is an increase in violent crime rates in a community caused by reduced proactive policing due to the community's distrust and hostility towards police.
No, that whole thing. No.
How do you feel about it? Other than just no.
Okay. See, this is like
waving
and these are things that people are talking about.
No,
so
I know.
Jason, I'm gonna let you finish, but like I got
why
I'm cocked and loaded.
Why do they specifically call it the Ferguson effect? Like,
I guess supposedly this started happening. Yeah, I'm like,
I
police distrust has been happening for a while. It didn't start with Ferguson.
Yeah,
I have the answer for that, Baxter. Basically, what ended up happening was that there was a slight uptick in crime directly after Ferguson. Because what the Ferguson,
but not in Ferguson, like
no, in Ferguson, but also around the country. But what happened was that there was a police chief in Ferguson that essentially said the reason why there's been an uptick in crime is because the public scrutiny of police officers has made them skittish and less willing to actually police. So they're basically saying, because you're criticizing us, we're hesitant to actually do our job, which is allowing the criminal element to creep in, which, by the way, multiple studies have shown in that time that actually wasn't the case. And in fact, one of the studies that was done in Ferguson, the uptick in crime actually had begun pre-Ferguson.
So my other question would be, like, how do they know there's an uptick in crime if the police aren't active?
Make it up. They often
that's my point. It's like the only way that you know there was crime is if it's reported, and if it's reported, that means the police are involved, and the police are involved in that they're policing, right? Like, how could there possibly be an uptick in crime?
Yes,
if they're not if they're not actually policing.
Well, no. So here's the thing we have to remember, guys, about the police. The police, and this is sort of the myth, right? We watch TV and we think police go out and look for crime. Now they do in our communities because they're basically just saying we're all.
But that's not even what I'm saying. I'm saying, like, this is a statistic. This is a statistic that got.
Sorry, Baxter. Sorry to cut you off, but let Mikal finish, because I don't think he made his point yet.
Well, and I'm just trying to answer the question of what you're saying is effectively you can report a crime after the fact and it be considered an increase. The police being involved doesn't necessarily mean that they were there to stop it. It just simply means that once I'm burglarized and I call the police are involved. So the crime is reported. But we believe the way we perceive police is that they stop crime. So like they're out there in the streets looking to find a burglar. They're actually not. They're basically just there. And then what ends up happening is when the crime is then committed, then usually that's when you call the police. And then there's an investigation if the said person is not found. And depending on who you are, what the neighborhood is, depends on how much effort they're going to do and put in to actually finding that particular individual. So the statistic can show an increase in uptick in crime, even if the police effectively, quote unquote, are not there doing their job. The perception is that police feel that it's their presence that acts as a deterrent. In other words, just kind of similar to what Jason was talking about earlier, where there's like police in the park. The thought process is, well, if these little black kids see us there, then they're going to act right, as opposed to just making the assumption that these are little kids. What possibly can they be doing that you actually need to have eyes on them other than their parents?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and then also to falsely tie it to Ferguson. I mean, that's the part where they're just making up stuff to tie it to the protests, and it's not related.
It's not related, and more to that point, it stokes the mythology that you find in a lot of these cities that what's wrong with Black people is not enough cops. And so they say, okay, we need more cops. And then, you know, as industrialization morphs into what it's becoming, you have fewer and fewer white folks employed. So now we got more cops. Great. And you got fewer and fewer opportunities to not be part of the apparatus. See, that to me, that's one of the macro issues. Like, you have less artists, less thinkers, less scientists, less everyone. And so folks, okay, so what's left is the military, the police, the hospital, the fire department, corrections, you understand? So again, we fall into this thing where we have to accept the mythology and this is my own personal sort of recipe, but I don't think Bobby E. Wright used to talk about this thing called the relativity spiral. And it's just a collection of words that we get used on us, sometimes with good intention, but basically it causes inaction. And the relativity spiral is hope, faith, belief, love, wish, you know, a lot of these things without a tangible floor on them, right? So you can say, I want you to hope for something, but that usually means you're not going to do it, right? And so usually when you suggest to people that they should use their faith, what you're asking them to do is not use their waking memory. Okay.
Well, I'm asking people to use both because
I got you.
The spiritual truth is we are all one. And so there is no criminal element outside yourself.
I got you.
Agreed.
Agreed. I'm just saying in practice, what happens is when people say, I have faith in a thing, that usually, like Dr. Clark would say, faith is simply the acceptance of a reality without proof of its existence. You know, and he would say things like, belief is not a constructive thing to do with your brain, because you can just remember, or you can say you know, or you don't know, and then it releases you of it. That's it. You either know it or you don't know it. So for me to have faith in the narrative of a police force that would do better than my memory would indicate it has done is not constructive. Neither is it safe for me, right? So like for those of you who said, well, I have criminals in my family, like folks that I know, right, and caught up in it. My question would be like, how many of them people took a pay cut to do any of that? You know, like, I don't know anybody risking their life to make less money.
Yeah, definitely.
And so,
so I mean, the way that I look at it though is it's like, it's a lot like the like medicine in America too, right? It's like they feed you shit that makes you sick, and then they exploit you in the treatment of that stuff, right? Okay. So it's like when we talk about the policing and we talk about getting rid of policing, we're talking about like fixing the treatment. It's like this is the way that they're treating the thing isn't right. Like, you know, it's exploitive, it's racist, it's blah blah blah. So we're stopping the treatment, but we also have to address the thing that they're feeding you that's making you sick, because when you stop the treatment, the sickness is still there. And that's what I'm saying. It's like there is a culture of criminality, but even that's rooted in white supremacy.
There's a culture of desperation. It's not
right. I mean, but exploitation.
That's why I reject the word criminality, because it's desperate, and I would argue.
Yeah. I like putting the focus on something else.
I like however you want to shape it, whatever you want to call it, however we want to like paint it. Like at the end of the day, there are people who are desperate, who are resorting to things that are hurting other people to satiate themselves, right?
No. It's not about satiety. It's about surviving. And I would offer.
Yeah.
But check me out.
Satiation goes into desire.
Yeah, I'm not even on that. I'm saying
the wrong word.
Yeah.
But when you are, first of all, you can be desperate. When you have children, you are exponentially more so.
Talk about it.
But like I don't want to pretend like
exponentially
everybody
more-
who's out there committing crimes is doing out to feed their kids. Like some of them just want money. Like, but my point is like, we can acknowledge that all of that is even a product of white supremacy. All of that is even a product of the station that Black people find themselves in because of the institutionally oppressive structures of America. We can even acknowledge that it's been addressed before, like with the Black Panther Party, with their coexistence was to address the criminality in their own neighborhoods in their own way, right? They walked around their streets holding guns for the same reason, for their presence to make people in their communities safe, right? Like, you know
They
what I'm
did
saying?
that for the cops, not for
Yeah,
their
for
own-
the cops.
But not
Jason,
just-
what
but not-
was the,
but
what
not
was
just
the
for the
original thought
cops.
that you wanted to finish? Sorry.
The-
Thank you so much for that, Baxter, for your opinion. And Jason, what did you finish your thought?
Well, almost.
Okay.
So the issues seem to be couched in the reactions and not the causation. And so as long as the causation is never the point, then we will always be dealing with the reactions, right? And the thing is,
Yes.
Black people don't control systems where we can say we're the cause of kind of anything on the real side. Even hip hop as a culture is a reaction to a thing that we don't control.
Yes.
So I mean that's my take on it. But
Nor do we control it, by the way.
come on, while we're on the subject, we don't even control that. Now, we're caught up in this thing and we react in different ways. But when you say like folks are not out here trying to feed their children, I mean, I volunteer in the correctional environment.
I didn't say that they're not. I said they're not only out here to feed their children.
The vast majority of people I've come into contact with were. Go ahead.
Can I co-sign that as someone who also has worked in Rikers as well as you, Jason, for several years?
Yeah.
You know, many of the young men that I was in working with really fell under two categories.
Mm-hmm.
Being mistaken for being a part of a particular action, or we're coming from environments, both familial and communal, where there was absolutely zero opportunity for them to do something that effectively would be considered quote unquote law abiding.
Right.
So their course of action began from the idea that Jason's talking about, but we understand that yes, Baxter, there are definitely other elements attached to that. But their main emphasis was like, well, there is no job for me to get. I need protection because of the area I'm in. Because that's another facet we don't talk about, especially with young people. Most of the time, young people are joining gangs, not because they want to do things, it's because the area they're in, if they're not in one, they will become the victim of one.
A victim
Never
by
talked
who?
about.
A victim of who?
Other people that are violent. Whether it's
who
another
are these other people that are violent?
I don't know. Whoever might be violent towards them.
That's my point. Is that there is a culture of violence.
No, that's a culture of surviving that's what I'm
Yeah,
saying.
that's survival.
Listen,
That's
those
still
two
survival.
things. Those two things are not separate. Like people looking to survival turn violent. It's part of the
Not all-
culture. I mean, not all of them. Yes,
But-
Well,
definitely.
so I have a question.
But
Do
we-
you believe? Can I ask you a question, Baxter? Do
Mm-hmm.
you believe then effectively that there are some individuals that are just innately predisposed, no matter what the
I do not.
circumstances?
No,
Okay,
I do not.
because and the reason why I'm saying is because it sounds as if from your example that there's just someone who's basically like, I just want to fuck somebody up.
No, that's
Like, I don't give a
that's
fuck.
not.
I just want to take somebody out.
That's not what I'm saying at all.
Okay,
No word that has come out of my mouth has implicated that this is something that is unavoidable or not, or that is not a result of systemic oppression. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like,
But you're saying the violence though doesn't have a purpose other than to be violent.
No, I'm saying that it exists. I'm saying that a culture of violence exists. It is there. It is a thing that is happening. Pretending like it's not happening or acknowledging the reason it's happening and using the reason as an absolution for it doesn't benefit anything, right? Like there are people who are in these streets right now being violent for their survival, for just their own personal gain, for whatever reason might happen. Like, yo, gun violence is out of control. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, if you did, like, look at the stats. If you want to like look at the statistics of it, like, look.
Disagree, but there's a simple solution to ending gun violence. We just get rid of the guns, and some of the big perpetrators of gun violence are police. So
I agree with that too.
I think we need to disarm them as well.
Agreed.
Right. I'm not against.
These are really great points.
I'm not against.
But I do want to just address Baxter. I think we heard what you were saying, but I think because, like what Jason said, you were using terminology focusing on the actions. And many times in a lot of different issues in our society, we focus on the symptoms of the problem. Like, you have the flu, but you're treating the cough. Well, you have to treat the flu, or you have to treat whatever bacteria has gotten inside of you. And I think Jason brought up that we have to treat the problem. If all these people feel desperate, or even if you feel like people are being violent because for their own personal gain, like everybody got Jordans, I want some Jordans, so I'm gonna rob this nigga that got Jordans and I'm gonna have Jordans. Now that might be what the crime is, right? That might be it, but it's because of societal issues putting power on people who have Jordans or have gold teeth or whatever the fuck you want.
I mean,
and that's a societal issue. So, like, I think Jason was trying to make the point of we have to concentrate on the problems, and there might be a culture of violence, but we have to look at why that violence is happening. So the culture is not actually violence. The culture
I agree with all of that. I agree with all of that. But the thing is, like, to work on that, you have to acknowledge it exists, right? So even when you say the culture isn't, like, there is a culture of violence, like that exists. Like, you know, even if you want to talk about hip hop and hip hop promoting the culture of violence, and even if you want to talk about that promotion being part of a system that is set to exploit the youth into coveting certain things, and the prison pipeline, and even if you want to talk about all of that, we can't ignore that it works, right? It exists. Like, there's people who covet Jordans. There's people who covet
starter jackets.
Like, you know, whatever it is that they're coveting, and whatever rack, like I agree, like everyone else does, that
Eddie Bowers.
A lot of our problems are constructed to be that way. Like, we are being exploited at the top and at the bottom. We're being exploited by the people that's feeding us and the people that are treating us. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, I agree completely. The only thing I differ in is, like, I don't find the need to, like, dispel the idea that the culture of violence exists, or that there is like, you know, there is this thing, there is a criminal element in our neighborhoods, in our, like, you know, in our societies. Like, I think
it's just desperation thresholds.
Well,
let's hear what Mikal had to say, and then we're going to get into another video.
Well, no, I just wanted to say just this really quick, and if everyone would enjoy, I just want to share a quote about the Ferguson effect, and we're talking about these crime increases. But I'd also say this too, Baxter. You're absolutely right. There's a culture of violence. It's called the United States of America. I think that's the biggest issue.
I agree with that too.
It is not a Black culture. It is not a brown culture. It is not an indigenous culture. It is literally manifest destiny. It is literally chattel slavery. It is literally Chinese internment camps during World War II.
But that's Japanese, and then the Chinese Exclusion Act. So
exactly.
Agree.
So I just like to share this really quick. So, deconstructing the Ferguson effect, 2017, there's a great New York Times article that really goes into this. I'm just going to share this quick quote. In perhaps the most global study, David C. Perusa, a sociologist at the University of Colorado Boulder, and his co-authors looked at crime rates in 81 large American cities in the year after Mr. Brown's death and found no overall increase. However, in some cities like Baltimore, New Orleans, St. Louis, and Washington, there was a striking upward trend in homicides. Richard Rosenfeld, a criminologist, made similar findings, but noted that police activity as measured by arrests had begun declining as far back as 2010. If we're going to attribute higher crime to pullback, we have to explain why we didn't see that earlier. What racism and white supremacy loves to do is create a boogeyman. Birth of a Nation, it was a boogeyman.
Yep.
The
It was a boogeyman.
All of that, the broken
Rosewood,
windows,
yeah.
all of that. So we have to realize, and I'm so happy that Kristin has really kind of, for me especially, but I feel like this conversation is being reframed. Let's remove this idea of crime and think about violence, because I think that is, for me, it's more helpful simply because, yeah, crime is subjective. Donald Trump is a criminal.
Yes.
Bill Clinton is a criminal.
Come on.
Richard Nixon is a criminal.
Yeah.
Joe and Bobby Kennedy are criminals.
Mhm.
We are subjective in what we choose to villainize when we think about crime,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And by the way, Bobby Kennedy's crime was not a white collar crime, but it was actually a violent one. We don't have time for that history lesson. But the point being is that I think it's more advantageous for us to think about it the way Kristin highlighted violence, because then we can get into the ideas of what you're talking about, Baxter, thinking about, well, it exists. Yes, but the only way we can solve it is to understand the why, which is what Jason's talking about. Because once we do that, then we can see how we can address it, and we don't minimize it and we don't individualize it, because once we individualize it, that's where we have these schisms along the lines of race.
When you say individualize it, what do you mean? Like highlight it to Black people?
I mean, pointing it to a particular group of people or a person, because when you think crime, you don't, and this goes back to what was in the new Jim Crow. When you think crime, you never think white person.
Yeah,
when
you don't
you
think
literally
white collar, you don't think about tax evasion and shit like that.
Listen, the Rittenwood, who walked around with an automatic rifle and shot innocent people unarmed in Wisconsin. He was a mass murderer.
White people have the monopoly on crime. Whatever crime that exists, they've done it, and they've done it better than anybody else.
No. I would say they have the monopoly on violence.
Yeah.
Right. They have the monopoly on violence, and that's not to say that we are not violent. Now, I want to be clear about that too. I'm not one of these individuals.
We can't afford to be violent like that.
Because we don't get the pass, right, brother? We don't get the pass.
Right.
But I want to be clear, and on a level, I do agree with what Baxter's saying. Like, we do have the propensity for violence. We are able, because we are human. Right. But it's because, to your point, it's usually based around some idea of scarcity, or to a certain degree, to what kind of Baxter was saying and what Dale said, extreme avarice, greed, the need to have more than what we actually, and that's a societal issue.
That's the American way. Yeah.
It's society,
it's a capitalist way.
Well, it's you know what it is? It's a society. What we've done is, listen, it's
also a reaction to being exploited, right?
Well, we're flawed as humans, right? That's the other thing, right? Like, we are not perfect beings. We may be spiritual, we may have some aspects of the divine in us, but we as a now I'm getting to a whole nother level here, but we are flawed. We have weaknesses. We have designed a way of living that basically exploits our weaknesses. It pulls at the thread that unravels us from what would be divine. Because I actually do believe, I do believe our humanity is divine. We would not have been created if we were not so. What we have done, though, however, is we have not tapped into the part of ourselves that is the strongest, but we've allowed ourselves to be preyed to.
When you say we haven't, like who's the we and who's the haven't?
Everybody.
That's what I'm saying. I am not one of these people that believes that somehow there's a group of people, white people, that are not human beings. That's out for me.
Yeah.
Conversely, I do not think that there are individuals of any race that are perfect and without fault. What I do believe, though, is that we all have the capacity for a great and powerful divine existence, and that every single day we are tested to that on all levels, and we make choices. And some of those choices are less for some and more for others, based on how we as humans have created. The most dangerous thing about us is that we have two things: an imagination and adaptability. So conditions where other species and other things either are cast out or down, we have the ability to literally transform our very reality to suit what we need to do to move forward. Those that have tapped into that to a certain level that might be on the negative side is the reason we have, in my view, we have these very difficult, disgusting, violent societies that exist. When we tap into that, to the more positive aspects, we have these loving ideas. This is why, as an educator, why I became an educator, because I believe in youth, that is just inherent.
But
And the responsibility for us as adults is to nurture more of that and allow that to shine through, because at some point you will have to make choices that could lead you down these all types of roads. And this goes back to this idea we're talking about in violence. We all have I have the capacity for violence. If I am put in the wrong situation, if I am in an emotional or physical or mental state that does not allow me to think and be calm, I could be perpetuate violence. If I'm honest, I probably have perpetuated violence on some level in my time with individuals because of a low state that I've been in. I think we are all privy to that. The question is, what do you do after, and what are the choices you make so that you maintain to kind of move forward in that direction? And that's what I'm talking about. We don't have a community as a collective whole that sees the value to say, this is something you have done. Here's the way that we can have it be redeemed, but you must take accountability for that thing. That feels like such an abstract thing, right? Because we're so far down the road of depravity of like, well, if you did something, fuck it, you're going to go into a deep, dark hole. Or, you know what? You don't have it. Well, you got to figure out a way to get it. Get it however you're going to get it. And make sure that you're the right shade and you're the right gender, because it's the only way you're going to get away with it. We created that. So, yeah.
Yes.
Sorry. That's it. Yeah.
Oh, man.
So since there's a pause, thank y'all so much for this conversation. I really love it. We're going to get into another video. This is Joshua Sarah with Beasts.
Oh, this is a sad poetry night, isn't it? I said a progression of life. There's a progression, so we're going to move on. You can't out-beast the beast. You can't out-beast the beast. No! You can't out-beast the beast. So be yourself. They didn't suspect this victory so quickly. They expected the history to leave me sickly, but I'm too serious about my people, and my God, these creature comforts don't tickle me. No, I don't want to spend all my time trying to binge on Netflix, because teaching children to express themselves through poetry is how I get kicks. No, I don't crave these FDA potions that make us nutritional slaves from Gerber to the grave. Just like give me a mango. Yep, I want land instead of rims. Yep, I want Lupitas instead of Kims. Yep, I do listen to Muhammad's. Nope, I don't want to be adopted by Phil Drummonds or Madonnas or Brad's. Man, my Sankofa so swag. I literally got the future in the bag. You can call it a placenta sack. Shea butter on big bellies humming Coltrane, man, I'm into that. No more broken home syndrome, started by rapists with no regard. Thought they had made a system so hard I wouldn't even bother. But I'm an amazing husband, a spectacular father. You never seen a man so ready to go heru. No, my people are not crabs in a barrel. They Africans, Ethiopians, they indigenous beings of God in an enslavement situation. And still, we laugh and love and thrive. That gives me inspiration to spend perspiration on self-determination. The Ethiopians have arrived, and we claim this globe is homeland. If you dealing death to the planet, you played the wrong hand. Can't let nobody run up on mama. Come on, man. Rodney already asked, can we all get along? But the news 20 years later show how y'all respond. Everywhere is war. So I got 100 prayer warriors focused on you right now, ready to activate the vision boards and manifest victory like blah. Locks just all in the pro poem. I got some comedic yogis holding warrior positions, meditators jamming your counter and tail missions. I got Reiki masters globally embedded, sending me energy, and you just don't get it. I'm coming for you with empaths and dream walkers, Malcolm thinkers and king talkers, Orishas on standby, Kundalini getting stirred, Orishas on ancestors on speed dial. I say that's my word. We going in like the movie can't end until we win, cause we the heroes. Hey yo, the bar don't close till everybody get chose. Hey y'all, the next round of victories is on me. I say.
It's just, you know.
The construction site has a window in the boarding, so you can see exactly what massacre they make of us. Condos like upright slave ships as mechanic cranes noose my childhood. They coffee shop our hip hop like we don't know value. Up the ante on our livelihood like we don't got value. My mother comes from Jamaica by way of Jamaica Queens. My father is from the Bronx with family from Haiti. This America was never really ours. This America was emptied, raided, bartered, and traded all on the backs of innocent browns and blacks as the islands trickle behind it. My last name, my all I know to be true is just African twice removed. It's just robbed, raped, and pillaged twice removed, and now I can't even claim where I lay my head. Washington Square Park, a mecca for newcomers and hipsters alike, was once where enslaved Africans lived, was called lands of the blacks. Their bloodshed be water to grow this city how fertile. To this day, the remains of over 20,000 brown and black bodies lie beneath there. Who am I to think that my bones aren't next? These days, it just feels like someone is trying to steal me from me again. But you know what? A wise homegirl once told me that the body is home. And any place else is just where you stay. So you know what? Y'all can take Kings County. I'll keep the crown.
Yeah. So we just heard two poems back to back from a wonderful gentleman, teaching artist named Joshua Sarah, and another creative named Kiara Harmony, speaking not only on the Black experience, but gentrification, stereotyping, policing. I have a few questions that I want to get in. We've been like really,
come on.
We've been really going.
Come on.
And I'm looking at this time and I'm just like,
I got time. Woo! I don't know about y'all, but I got time.
I mean, it's a snowstorm.
Nation
it's a
time.
snowstorm.
Yeah, where we going?
Nation time. I know a couple of us do have other engagements tonight, so I don't want to take up all your time or just have you all flustered.
Well, I'm like Jason. I got some hot cocoa. I'm good.
I'm here. I'm good. I got my water. I'm good.
I'm up here for sure.
All
yeah,
right.
you're right.
But our first, let's see. The first question I wanted to ask after this series of videos was, what are your views on the 1619 project, and what is your opinion of its intentions? Do you see its value? And if you're not familiar with the 1619 project, but I think I'd heard of it when someone submitted this question to me, but I didn't really deep dive into what it was. Yeah. But the 1619 project is a long form historical revisionist project developed by Nicole Hannah Jones, writers from the New York Times and the New York Times Magazine, which aims to reframe the country's history by placing the consequences of slavery and the contributions of Black Americans at the very center of the United States national narrative.
So you mean a course correction?
Yeah.
That's how you feel? Yeah.
A Truth and Reconciliation
podcast.
Yeah.
Great.
Additive. Yeah. Personally, I feel quite tied to the lineage. Like I said, my people are from Tallahassee, like very near Rosewood, Houston, Texas, and a small town near Lake Charles called Kinder, Louisiana. And I find that you cannot honestly talk about America without talking about the foundation of pretty much everything, which is slavery. I find that the 1619, the impetus is righteous. What the times did with it, a bit less righteous. Only because, at least in New York is a funny place to be Black, because the hard part is that as soon as you start talking about slavery in America, people get antsy about it don't include enough people, which is to say, like, Black American is like the kind of Black that even other Black people don't want to really be, because it means a whole lot of things. Like, we don't have a parade in Brooklyn, really. We got an event in Brooklyn, but it's more cops than anything at that event, and we can't move. We got to stand still, right? we got an event in Harlem, but we don't have a parade like that. So, you know, the slavery is nothing that America really wants to deal with. And so when you have people who aspire to the American dream, they don't want to deal with it either, because that's part and parcel of being an American. 1619, as I said, conceptually, is something we definitely need to deal with. Like, I'm 100% what they call ADOS, pro reparations, like all of that. And there's a Black agenda, which does include all Black people here. But I think what the problem is that 1619 got introduced as a concept, you know, to like modern society. And then like affirmative action, it was immediately co-opted into another thing, which kind of blunts the tip of a lot of those issues and just makes it into something that people kind of bring out during February and says, be nice to Black people while they're standing there, you know, and then, you know, it's like a kid and it'll say, you know, here's the difference between sweet potato and pumpkin pie. Here's the difference between, do the right thing and bamboozled. And, you know, here's the difference between Charles Barkley and Michael Jordan. And then everybody says, okay, cool. But 1619 was supposed to be peeling back all of the layers on how America is built. And it didn't actually do that, because most of America would rather not have that conversation. And so as soon as you give that idea to the Times, or you give it to any part of the American machine, they're going to spin it into Wakanda. They're going to spin it into, you know what I'm saying, Frozone. They're going to spin it into whatever a more palatable Black thing is, right? Because it's not entertaining to talk about slavery. It's not fun. It's not helpful unless it's you that it happened to. You know, unless we're talking about and then it's like reparations, like all of those things that, the stock exchange, they got slave dungeons under the stock exchange today.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But people don't want to talk about that. They got, for a long time, the largest plantation there was in Brooklyn. So there's a lot about the 1619 project that I find, I would call it underrealized, maybe misappropriated, because it's not just an academic exercise. Like, we're still here.
Yeah.
And that's that for me, it's the here and nowness of it. I'm saying here and nowness. That's a phrase that I'm trying to introduce into the lexicon, because I find that as long as we can tie it to, 1865, or as long as we can tie it to a place where we ain't at that place and then people ain't here, then it never gets dealt with the level of seriousness it needs to get dealt with. So
well, you know what's going to happen. Agree to all of that, but I think the dirty thing you're talking about is the A word, which, if we talk about it to the depth you're talking about it, because I hear what you're saying, I'd agree, but then you make us accountable. And that's why we don't want to have the discussion. When you think about the Holocaust, and you think about taking responsibility for that, and you literally have a state government that says we are responsible for that, well, now you actually have to do something about it. When you have Truth and Reconciliation in South Africa, well, now you have to fundamentally change the political structures in order to address what you are saying you are accountable for. To your point, I'm just reiterating what you're basically saying is you're never going to have the 1619 project. And I was a fan of it, but I agree with the critique, is that it couldn't go as deep and as far, because it means that, well, if that's the truth, well, then there has to be a redemption. There has to be, or not even a redemption, there has to be a reconciliation. There has to be a payment of some sort. There has to be, because a wrong and injustice is clear, and it's systemic. So you're not going to have that discussion. And the truth of that is why Trump commissioned the 1776 project as a counterbalance. You show the fear of even just that little tiny bit of truth being kind of brought to life. But
But I mean, yeah.
Yet. Maybe it's just we haven't gotten there yet because we haven't made it to that state yet. But I vastly prefer 1619 to 1776. And
for sure. Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, of course.
But I do appreciate what Jason is saying, which is that, you know, we're nowhere near the promised land just because of like the 1619 project. That there's still so much to be done, and that there's large aspects of history still so sanitized.
Yeah, and I what I'm learning now is that we haven't spent the energy that we should have on the educational directives, because like for me, I benefit greatly in the fact that my dad is 83 years old, right? So he can talk to me about his grandparents and great grandparents who were born into slavery. He grew up during segregation. Like he grew up where he'd say, you know, if you wanted to eat someplace, and if you knew the person, the best you could do was go into the kitchen. The cook would take his apron off, swipe the onions off the cutting board, and you could eat on the cutting board, walk back out the kitchen. That was if you was allowed in at all, because you couldn't be seen walking in through the entrance, all these kinds of things, right? But this history is something that affected a lineage of people, right? So it's not because you get a lot of pushback like, man, you know, we didn't own slaves, or my people weren't slaves. And yeah, police brutality is bad, but that doesn't happen like that. So, you know, there's a lot of deflection involved in this subject matter. And, you know, just like with the Holocaust, I mean, reparations is the order of the day, you know, and no reparations from America anyway does not include every Black person here in the same way. The Holocaust, the reparations for the Holocaust does not include everyone alive during that time either. You know, reparation. Now, I would argue that the vast majority of Black people on earth are due reparations, just not all from the same apparatus, right? Like Jamaicans are definitely due reparations from Great Britain, for sure. Haitians, definitely. For sure. Like
Haitians need to stop paying France.
What I'm saying, like, I'm saying for real, like from Spain, from Portugal, from Belgium, like Black people everywhere are due reparations. And right now we just sorting out who's owed from who. That's all. And our physical location often does, but should not confuse that issue.
Like, and also to say too about reparations, when we talk, at least when I'm talking about reparations, it also does not mean a check for every single person on the planet. It's in the ways of like land resources. It's about
all of that.
Educational benefits. It's about it doesn't have to be like, okay, every Black person on the planet get $2 million.
Well, let me talk about that just a little bit. And this is why I think it's important we go at the educational apparatus, because a lot of the reason people think that it's so problematic is because they've been educated in that if you give people something they haven't earned, then they'll get used to receiving things that they don't earn. And I mean, reparations is a debt. It's a bill, right? It's a bill with, you know, unfortunately, such a high dollar amount that people might not even live long enough to fully pay that off, because we're not talking about reparations for a thing that someone had. We're talking about things that people are still using, like, you know, Chapel Hill, like the Capitol building, like the White House, like stuff that's still here, that's still generating revenue, that's still part of the landscape. Okay. But, you know, the United Daughters of the Confederacy say, okay, well, the North, the South lost the war, but we're going to win the peace. And we're going to win the peace by educating every generation from then until now that it wasn't the Civil War, it was the war of Northern aggression. And so anything the South can do, right? That's why the narrative thing to me is so important. That's why, you know, we say a culture, culture of criminality and violence. And I mean, we got to be careful about how we word it, because that's going to reverberate out. And so people will hear that and say, we have a culture of violence. No, we have a culture of desperation. And when you are desperate enough, you become violent. But we're human beings everywhere. As you said, Mikal, everyone has that capacity, right? And so, you know, it's important that we recognize that slavery is much longer, much older, much bigger than us, right? But we're unique in that it is still how we're functioning in a lot of ways. In a lot of ways, we're still on plantations. We're still trying to survive these things. And so we have to figure out a way to like bench press that whole apparatus off. That's why you can't reform it, because there's nothing good about enslaving people, right? There's no parts of these things that are really worth saving. You know, and it's really, to me, it's important that we, you know, slavery is one of them ideas. You gotta drown it where it is. Like you can't have a better version of any version of it, if that makes sense. Like the whole thing gotta be snuffed out.
Yeah, that definitely.
Next question.
No.
That's the book closing.
No. No, can I plug a book, or is that
Sure.
is that
No,
Go
plug
for
a book.
this is just one of the books. I put one in the chat, but this is one. The Half Has Never Been Told.
Okay.
And this is a good, not the only book, but this is a good foundation of how a lot of these things got built.
Mhm.
You know, and it just kind of sets the table for anyone wondering, like, why are things the way they are? That's all. That's all. Why, you know. And the only other one I plugged in the chat, but this brother's from Lake Charles, Louisiana, and he's right in there with us. The Man Not.
Mm.
You know, because a lot of the things that we're talking about are founded on the intrinsic criminality of Black maleness. A lot of it, you know, in addition to the hypersexuality of Black men and women, boys and girls. But it talks a lot about that. So, or the mythology around hypersexuality. So, yeah.
Thank you for sharing all that.
So,
go ahead.
My question about this whole 1619 thing is, who is it for? Like, who is it trying to course correct for? Who's supposed to read it and like get something from it? Like, you know what I'm saying? And a lot of it, like the reason why I really don't vibe with it is because it's something you can choose to ignore if you want to, right? It's a project. It's like the 1619 project. We're gonna write some things and you can read it or not read it. Whereas like systemic racism and oppression isn't anything that you could ever ignore. The way that you were taught America was built isn't anything that you had the volition to engage with or not. Like it was just kind of like given to you. And even things like reparations and things like that, which I'm definitely not against, I always have like an issue about, because even when we talk about things like about the culture of violence or the propensity to violence, we usually are like when we say things like we have to be careful, we're usually saying that because we have to be careful of how it's going to be viewed or how it's going to be heard or twisted by this hierarchy of like white supremacy and oppression, right? Like how they're going to use it. And so like if you own a company, right, who do you have to ask to pay yourself? Like nobody. If you wanted to pay yourself, you just pay yourself. And like that's the thing about reparations that always like, if we had the power, if we were in power, had the power structure, there would be no conversation of reparations. It just would be policy because we would just make it policy. But the fact that we like are even looking at it as like we should be given reparations still keeps a hierarchy of like there should be something given.
No,
from,
it's a debt.
But what I'm saying is like it's a debt being paid by the people who have. You know what I'm saying?
But right now
Like,
you're talking about like the mindset of us. The
but
mindset of-
not even the mindset. I'm saying like if the people who were in the Capitol building were all black people, there would be no conversation about if we should get reparations. It would just be like, all right, let's do this thing because it's needed to get done. But like because we're not in power, it is a conversation of like what should happen with us, but delegated by like other people. Like, you know what I'm saying? America is like, you move into an apartment where you're not on the lease, where it's like no matter what you negotiate with them, the power structure, until they like give up the lease, until they give up the power to you, the power structure is always one of like asking for and not necessarily just saying like this is how it is. Like, you know what you see what I'm saying? So
I definitely feel that, especially as someone running for office, we need to have our political power.
Right, but like that, it's so like white oppression is so insidious. It's so like seeped into every single thing that even like people would say things like, "Oh, you have to dress this way if you want them to respect you," not even realizing who's them. Who's them that you speak of, right? You know what I'm saying? So it's like even the 1619 project. Who's it for? Who's supposed to read this? Like, why is it separate from the curriculum that is America, right? Like, if you really want to make a difference, because like, you know, like it's an academic thing, right? It's for people who are kind of already invested in this sort of thing to relearn about it. But it's like, is it really reaching people that like need to know about it? Is it reaching kids that need to know about it? Is it like changing the way kids learn about America, the way kids engage with slavery? And I don't know that it is, and that's why I kind of have no use for it.
To answer your question directly, I know that it got to children because I was part of an initiative to make children privy to it. So I can tell you it got to children.
And how was this like who provided this initiative?
So I worked as a teaching artist with Carnegie Hall to help with some. So I can just tell you what I did.
No, yeah, please
right?
do.
Yeah. And a lot of it was difficult because you need parental consent when you talk about things like slavery, because these are mature subject matters. But
wait, is it any more mature than like the Revolutionary War?
No, it's not. It's just that the Revolutionary War is part of the wallpaper already.
Yes, right. I just wanted to say that to add to what you're saying.
Yeah. And so we had a lot of talks about it. Also in my volunteer work in the correctional environment, we had a lot of talks about it. And that, you know, you talk about having a tiptoe, like, man, I was tiptoeing like the Riddler in there, just trying to get a word in.
You ain't saying nothing but a brother man. Listen, that was the most frustrating thing for me working on Rikers, like what I was allowed to even bring in. And there's an officer in the room with you, with these young people. So you're trying to talk about their experience, their reality, and there's the literal officer sitting right there.
Right.
I literally had officers interject when I was giving information. Like, well, that's actually, I'm like, you're not a teacher nor a historian. You're a cop. That's cool. You know what you're talking about.
But but the thing is that they've been indoctrinated, right? Like the way it's like even when you try to like tell people, when you try to like shape the way they understand the world about gender, about sexuality, about race, about all this stuff, if it isn't how they were, and religion, right? Like religion, like this is why indoctrination is one of the most powerful tools.
Even my conditioning has condition.
Because like even if you look at religion, like the only reason you believe the religion you believe is because when you were young, someone told you that that's the way it was, and then you indoctrinate that, and then people are so unshaken from it. But it's like people were told that America was great. People were told that we were this beacon of freedom and democracy, and that's part of their fabric of their being. And anything that goes against that is a threat, and is treated as such, right? And it's also like the loss of privilege will always feel like oppression to the privileged, right? So when you start talking about like, you know, other people being owed something, or you talk about giving up power, giving up the lease to the apartment, that feels like oppression to some people. That feels like whoa, like, you know, I'm gonna lose, like men or white men specifically, like, you know, why does it got to be a BET? I'm gonna lose some bandwidth on this thing. Why does there got to be a Black History Month? It's like they don't realize that, like, yo, I mean, Black History Month is whatever, but they don't realize, like, yo, like, for other people to gain privilege, you have to give some of it up. Like you have to give some of it up.
Absolutely.
And
go ahead.
There will always be a fight against that, right? So
but there's, I mean, but again, nobody is everlasting. No individual is everlasting, and I
right. And
we're just seizing the moment where folks are, there's like because of the last 4 years and last year in particular, there seems to be more than a few people growing a conscience, and say, okay, while we're in the mode of growing a conscience, here's what we gotta fix, right? Here's the things, like, here are the people here who are owed a debt based on what is still currently happening. Let's square up with those people so we can get right and grow into whatever the next thing is, right? Like I've never been on the American exceptionalism thing, but just to function as a society, there are debts that got to get paid.
But I think the problem is even the people who like might acknowledge that there is a debt, look at it as something like, okay, we'll pay the debt and then like business as usual. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, but okay, but here's the thing: you're paying a debt to people who need it based on what their lineage has contributed to a thing. And then, like, for instance, like if I owe you money for services you did for me, I don't have to worry about what you're gonna do with the money. You're owed the money, right?
Until I use the money to buy.
Stop. It don't matter what you do.
But that's what I'm saying is like, that's when it stops, right? It's like, 40 acres and a mule. It's like, yeah, give them 40 acres and a mule, right? But then it's like, but that 40 acres has to come from somewhere. And when it starts coming from the land that already exists, that's when they're like, whoa. Let's slow down this 40 acres. Let's talk about this 40 acres.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine.
But what I'm saying is that's why it's not fine, right? Because like the compromise will be made. Like, cause like you said, people were gaining a conscience in the 70s. People were gaining a conscience in the 60s with Martin Luther. Like, you know what I'm saying?
It was all broken down.
The conscience comes, and then when it starts making headway, then they're like, we need to change some things. It's like with the stock market, right? It's like the rules of the game are fine until it starts benefiting other people. Then it's time to change the rules of the game. So it's like even if they gave you $1 million, the moment you start buying certain things with that $1 million, they'll change what you can buy with $1 million.
Check this out. They'll change it until we stop putting it on Instagram.
Well, that too.
When we just do it and like when we get it and bounce, and then by the time it's figured out, it's already a Greenwood Archer and Pine in Tulsa. By that time, like we know what went wrong. We couldn't protect any of it.
Right.
That's what went wrong in Black Wall Street. Go ahead.
I got two quotes for you. One is often used but misworded. Frederick Douglass.
Yeah.
Power seeds nothing without demand. And most deaf. True power move quiet. So when I'm thinking about this, to your point, Jason, and thinking about it, and I hear what you're saying, Bax. We have two recourses. I feel two choices. We can either continue, and I'm not saying either one is necessarily the right one or the wrong one. Just saying these are the two things I see that are the courses of action, and they might even be able to be done at the same time. Maybe we either continue to eradicate the myth, submit the evidence, the facts, the history, reinstall that to Jason's point, for the individuals that are coming into a conscience. Not a consciousness, but a conscience and a moral fiber that demands that they act in a particular way, then this is the work. And this is what we as educators, I see as our primary role, and the reason why I am a teaching artist and why I am specifically a teacher of art, because I feel that those two things are fundamentally designed to do some of this work, to do a lot of this work, if not support it, be at the very core of it. It's kind of what I was getting at in the piece that I'm having published. The other is my more fun one, which I enjoy, which I'm a fan of, is I am so about self-determination. I am so about divestment. That is my thing. When I think of the Black Panthers and when J. Edgar Hoover said, the greatest threat to American sovereignty in the United States today, and I teach this with my students, the exact quote, the greatest threat to American sovereignty today in America is the Black Panther free breakfast program. And my students are like, what? Yeah.
And
so
real quick, explain who J. Edgar Hoover
absolutely.
is in case
yes.
people don't know.
J. Edgar Hoover effectively was the head of the FBI and one of its foremost greatest agents. He was a part of it from its very inception. He was one of its first agents during the time of the Red Scare. It's deep. There's a great book that I have, Legacy of Ashes. It's an entire history on the FBI. And when I'm telling you it has all the dirty laundry, it's all the dirty laundry. So with all of that said, all I'm saying is this, is that the reason why he said that is because you can eliminate and destroy power, not just by confronting it, but by basically effectively starving it. If you recognize that your imagination, your labor, your ideas are the literal lifeblood that allows it to exist. And if you just simply cut those things off, that's what happened with Move that you were talking about, Dale. They weren't aggressive. They weren't violent, but it's
independent.
Right.
Yeah, they were independent.
But they were treated aggressively.
Oh no,
and that's my point.
Well, okay, but here's the reality. There's three recourses. Either we can accept what is and just be mad about it and just be like, well, this is what it's going to be. Or we can directly confront that system in a myriad of ways. That doesn't have to be violent. Or, which what I love is, look, there's Jade, there's Dale, there's Kristin, there's Jason, there's me, and there's you. Within just the six of us, there's probably a whole range of skills and ideas that we could collectively share that would be multiplied by the people we know with their ideas, skills, and collective work. Now, what happens when you start multiplying that out? This is what the core essence of what the Panthers were talking about. Now, we can talk about right, and we can talk about the Panthers, and there's some issues there. There's definitely some personal issues there. There's definitely some fundamental things there, but the core root of the idea was this idea. Same thing with Sonny Carson in Ocean Hill, Brownsville in the late 60s, early 70s. It's this idea that if we basically become interdependent on ourselves and one another, a lot of the things that we're talking about don't have the ability to directly affect us. And yes, they can only resort to violence. But Rosewood, Black Wall Street, all these things we talk about, none of these things were doing anything other than divesting, recognizing,
and
okay, y'all want to have that? Y'all can have it. We ain't gonna fuck with y'all. Don't fuck with us. We're gonna do our thing over here, and we're gonna
fuck with us.
But
that's what's your point, though? I guess what I want to know is like you're saying that.
Wait, sorry, Mikal. Kristin had a point.
Oh, sorry, Kristin.
Well, I was gonna say I think what you're describing is beautiful, and the only pushback I would give is that we need to have a multifaceted approach because someone needs to go get the state. Because you cannot just divest, because what keeps happening, as Baxter says, is they keep killing us. They keep trying to kill us.
Right.
So I think divestment is, important. My favorite Kwanzaa principle is Kujichagulia. It's self-determination. I am with that. But I am also very consciously aware that we need some people to go infiltrate government. We need some people to go infiltrate some other things because we got to deal with the state apparatus.
Right.
Yeah, no, and I hear that too, and that's why I was saying it's probably the reality. It's some type of hybrid blend of both. Yeah. I think I'm going to be on the divestment side.
Yeah, I mean, and here's the thing, man. I'm for divestment. Like if we today decided to do that, we have already spent hundreds of years paying into a thing that we ain't got our money back out yet. Mm-hmm. So even if that's why whether we divest or not, I'm not divesting until I get reparations because I've been paying into this thing my whole life.
You're gonna pay what you owe. I mean, And like Mikal,
I look at it like this, brother. I feel like I just want to ditch the lemon. Like I've been pouring all this money into this thing that's broken, fucked up, and ain't fixed. I just leave it by the wayside and keep it moving. But again, I think what we're all talking about. I don't think I think none of what we're saying like. It could be that and then some, all of that. Like I'm here for all of it. I mean, you know what I mean? Like
my only point is like if we're gonna stay in the apartment, we need to be on the lease, and if we're gonna leave the apartment, don't worry about the apartment. But also the motherfuckers from the apartment need to stop fucking with us. Like that's my only.
Well, if I'm leaving an apartment, to his point though, I want my deposit though.
I don't. Like I'm like, but at this point in our abusive relationship, I'm like, if I can leave and just have my own apartment and you leave me the fuck alone, you know what, keep the deposit. Like, you know what I'm saying? If they gave us half the country,
but they they wouldn't.
I know they never will do that. But if they gave us like the south half of the country and like that was like, I'd be like, cool, but that's not gonna happen.
You know the problem with that is that in the same way colonialism, in the same way sunlight, I don't know if y'all ever heard of this, but like the amount of sunlight that a place on the globe gets basically determines how much they will engage in colonialism. Basically, the more food grows where you are, the less likely you are to have to go and get it.
Facts.
Right. Guns, germs, and steel. Guns, germs, and steel.
There you go. Guns, germs, and steel. Yeah.
The cold in the dark makes you mean.
Come on, because you got to eat, right?
Scarcity.
Scarcity, right.
I mean, yeah,
that's it.
like
that's it.
Absolutely right. All of it.
They call that psychological disposition. Sheikh Anta Diop talked about it, and it's basically how your worldview is affected by how much environmental scarcity is around you. So if your environment freezes half the year, then you are some mathematical proportion more likely to be violent as a matter of survival because stuff is going to freeze. Because
your life is in danger more.
Because winter is coming. Right. That's where that came from.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Well, can we just acknowledge this too? Everything we're talking about, I feel like the thing always hanging in the air in these conversations for me is that in order to achieve all of these things, right? If we want to leave the apartment because there's a crazy abusive person, or we want to, fight and get them out, or we want to get the deposit, all of those things, nothing that we want, the justice that we need and that we deserve, and the prosperity that we need and deserve, is going to come with some level of human loss.
Yeah.
And I think that's been the biggest thing the last 2 generations have had a hard time to come to terms with, because we, at the apex of what we were doing in the civil rights movement, was some of the most, we talk about Ferguson and we can talk about everything that's been happening now, but there has been a long trail of tears and a long trail of blood that Black and brown people have endured that was almost at its zenith towards the early 70s. And I think there's no longer an appetite because no one wants to die.
Right. Nobody wants war. Compromise and peace is way more attractive.
But guess what? As Sister Soul just said in 1999, we are at war. The war's not ended.
Facts.
The war's not ended.
But that's also why the Ferguson riots and the Capitol riots are like drastically different, right? It's because like for Black and brown people, like the very threat of death is real. So it's like to ask people to be willing to die is a large ask, even if it seems imperative, right? The reason those people stormed the Capitol so blatantly is because they didn't fear for their lives. They knew that the cops weren't going to kill them and shoot them. You know what I'm saying?
Well, and also think about this too. When we have stuff taken away from us, our direct result is to show that what did Martin Luther King said? Riot is the language of the unheard.
Unheard, yeah.
Right. So when we who are oppressed, we don't storm the Capitol and try to take over the government. We just try to essentially show how upset we are. The Kerner Commission in 1968 basically said that the 2 or 3 years prior, over 100 plus riots had happened in every major city across the United States. The US government actually said the reason why those riots occurred was because of systemic institutional racism and abject
Poverty.
Yes, I mean, like the riot is the language of the unheard. Also takes into account that we've been screaming this for years, right? Like it's in our music, it's in our poetry, it's in our celebrities talk about it, our sports athletes talk about it. Like freaking Muhammad Ali lost his belt behind it. Like, you know what I'm saying? So it's like it's blatantly.
Or he gave up his belt. He knew what was gonna happen.
I mean, yeah,
which...
definitely. But it's you know, there's the like Colin Kaepernick thing. It's like the personal loss is a symbolic one. You know what I'm saying? But it's like, but it all goes ignored. And it's like, how long, like, divest, yes. Self-determination, yes. But until it is acknowledged that any gain from divestment or self-determination is always deliberately and violently opposed by government, like until we like acknowledge the fact that the United States government has a vibrant and fruitful investment in the oppression and subjugation of Black people, until that is like acknowledged, then it's like a cycle that goes around and around again. It's like we get ourselves together, we invest in ourselves, we build ourselves up, and then they fucking knock us down again. And then we spend years and years arguing with them about why it's happening.
I'm curious, Baxter, what do you feel?
Oh, wait, let me say this real quick.
Okay.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
So that's why what Kristin was saying about infiltration is so important. Like
I
we do
agree.
need people who have these values in certain spaces. And the unfortunate thing is like, I believe sometimes when you get into certain spaces, you're moving like the oppressor, and then you start acting like you start actually becoming the oppressor.
You do get co-opted, yes.
Yeah, you get co-opted. So that's unfortunate, but we do need more infiltration so that these laws change somehow. And we're not like smushed once we get our shit together, right?
So I just real quick, I think the only incontrovertible divestment that we can all engage in is wellness.
Facts.
Because you can, and by that I just mean that if you don't need their medicines, like if you don't need constant access to their medical apparatus, if you don't need, I mean, you know, for those of us who live in cities, like if you don't need public transportation, if you don't, not because there's no law saying you gotta take so many pills a month. There's no law saying you gotta use this. You gotta, you know, there's certain ways where we can just say, you know what, without making a big pronouncement, I'm all right. I just
but
don't
then they'll change the law that you have to take pills. You know what I'm saying?
And that's what I'm wondering about you, Baxter. What do you think what do you think we should do then? Because I feel like everything you're saying is not wrong or untrue, but it feels so. If I hear like a position where like we're fucked. So like, what do you think we should do?
It's not a position that we're fucked. It's a position of like acknowledging, like we are always. Like we know we're in a fight, but we never really like acknowledge who the fight is against. And what happens is but like we can acknowledge that
white supremacy.
We can acknowledge that like now in this situation, right?
Yeah.
What I'm saying is like when we go into the like Dale and like Kristin was saying, when we go into the what was the word that was used?
When we infiltrate the
when you go to infiltrate, right? You can't say that. Like, you know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. You start, and like Dale said, you start speaking and moving in certain ways. That like Obama was the first Black president, but was he really a Black president?
No.
He was a president who happened
incidentally brown.
Yeah, who happened to be Black.
Yeah, like Kamala, incidentally brown. Yeah,
right. And that's my point, because like to get to the point where the Democratic National Convention will nominate you to be president, you're already compromised. You can't even get that far without compromising yourself. Like, you know what I'm saying?
Well, and let me be clear. So let me go back and say, like, it's whiteness we're fighting. I won't say white people.
Whiteness.
It's whiteness, just like
the idea of whiteness.
It's the construct of the thing, because
definitely,
they're not white.
But even
humans
on a less metaphysical way, like we're fighting the United States government. Like we're literally like the government took apart the Black Panthers. The government bombed or supported the bombing of Tulsa, Oklahoma. Yeah. The government killed Fred Hampton. The government, you know what I'm saying? Like, but we keep like entering into this game, not acknowledging the government as our enemy. Like, you know what I'm saying? But
I think that's because the government is, and this is the tough part about it. You're right, and I think this is my problem with some of the metaphysical, because we have to figure out a way to say, yes, we're fighting the government, but the government is made up of individuals that are in agreement and accordance to act and move in a particular manner. So we are both fighting a system, but the system doesn't make itself. It's not like an AI.
Right,
There are people that are upholding and creating
But
things
to be
that are also everybody's in agreement with.
Right.
And that government actually spans beyond just politicians, because now we're thinking about companies, corporations, private entities. That is all intertwined and intermixed and intermingled with this. These things cannot work and move one without the other. So it's sort of like you have to include Jeff Bezos in this. You have to include Elon Musk in this. You have to include Hollywood in this.
Shit,
You have to
include Jay-Z. Include them all.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, I don't know. I
Also,
could go. Yeah.
Kristin has been trying to say something. I want to hear what. No, sorry.
Oh, because I was gonna say that I think you're right. I think the government has definitely been our enemy. I think it's not necessarily saying, okay, like Obama being in office, that wasn't an infiltration. That's what I'm saying, right? So like that's not what I'm talking about.
No, at all. You're
That was
absolutely
not
right.
an
You're absolutely
infiltration.
right.
no.
So I'm talking about, the person, Black person who gets in office and on day one of being president pardons all the political prisoners. And white America is like, what? What happened?
Yeah.
What just happened?
Come on.
That's what I'm talking about.
Right.
Okay.
Speaking
So,
of, sorry, I'll let you finish.
you get
I'm all for that. I just think that sorry.
but they're not crazy. They're the right things, but others will see them as nuts, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I also
Speaking
like the
of the
divestment
judicial
of wellness.
system, speaking of pardoning people, let's talk about qualified immunity. So for anyone who does not know what qualified immunity is, it is a legal principle that grants government officials performing discretionary functions immunity from civil suits unless the plaintiff shows that the official violated clearly established statutory or constitutional rights of which a reasonable person would have shown.
Yeah.
The threshold is way too high for that to be legal, in my opinion.
Yeah,
I agree.
This is crazy.
I just did a presentation on qualified immunity for Carnegie. I don't know when they're going to use it for whatever their thing is, but qualified immunity is usually presented as, in circumstances where, say, someone dies while under the care of an EMT. So you can't hold it. You can't charge the EMT with murder, or a firefighter or something, something like that.
Yeah.
That's how they explain it. But really what it means is that if you got a badge on, you can do whatever you want. And one of the other things that folks use to support qualified immunity is and I'm a little shaky on some of the terminology because I just did this, I just learned about it. But basically, police live outside of the communities that they police as like a buffer of protection, right? So they don't have to go home to the people that they just got through policing on. You understand? So so this sort of shield of immunity, and see, qualified immunity is nothing that's not a term people are actually using. They'll say the blue shield, or know, back the blue, or they'll say, America first, or whatever, however they frame it. But qualified immunity is, higher up the food chain, how it's described, and it's supported basically without even talking about cops, but that's why it's there. January 6th is a great example of qualified immunity kind of run rampant.
Yeah.
Like everything is screwed up and it ain't nobody's fault because everybody's at work.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, what's needed is accountability. The scale is so drastically on the other end of the matter.
Sure. Sure. I think if there was, like in most countries, and I've been fortunate, I got to travel a lot in my life. I found in most places, they're either governed by the military, and that's clearly the military. They have tanks, they have machine guns, they're tactical, garments, and they're dressed as the military. Or you have constables that, flashlights, nightsticks, zip ties, that kind of thing. But then you have a thing called armed police. They call them different things, but that's a special unit that you don't really use on civilians, right? Like if someone robs the bank, you know, they show up with Richard Nixon masks and they jump out of a, you know what I'm saying? They jump out of a truck and run up in a bank. Okay, you call this special unit for that. But that's not who you use on regular people crossing the street. Yeah.
Right.
You understand? So
that's been my experience in Western Europe, in Africa that I've been in Brazil. In Brazil, it's MPs. That's
military police.
In fact, there's transcription in Brazil. So at 18, just like in Korea, and I believe it's also in Korea the same thing, is when you basically your conscription as part of being a citizen, what you really end up doing is you go into the military to become the police for 2 years. They don't put you in like the defense. They basically put you in the police. But then, as you said, like France, Germany, England, you know, everyday police officers, and they're still trained. They could take you down if they need to, but they don't have deadly weapons. They're not trained in deadly force to deal with their citizenry.
Well, that's because in most civilized countries, like, you know, policing shouldn't be a life or death situation 99% of the time.
By the way, their crime rate as well as their prison rates majorly lower than ours.
Yeah, right.
Even when you adjust for population, even when you adjust for population percentage wise, which to what you were saying earlier, Kristin, about the answers to get rid of the guns. Yes, the answers to get rid of the guns. What's interesting is we are a country that has never been under occupation by another country, nor have we had on our actual soil. There's not like occupying forces that have been on the United States soil in war. We do not have neighbors that we are in direct opposition with since the Mexican-American War. And yet we are the most heavily militarized, policed, and weaponized people on the planet. This is probably the safest place you actually want to be in comparison to any other part of the world. And we walk around as if this is the most dangerous place to be. This goes back to what you were saying, because I'm similar to you. I've been fortunate enough. I've pretty much visited every continent except for Australia and Antarctica. And in every other place, I have actually been in places where I have been definitely in situations where violence was eminently more closer to me than even in Brooklyn, and people did not have weapons.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean,
Baxter, what was your point you wanted to make?
Well, to go back to the idea of qualified immunity, I think the issue is that, like, the idea of qualified immunity, like, theoretically makes sense, right? If you are in an occupation where, you know, something might go wrong, like your occupation deems you to be in this place, maybe there should be some different rules for you than the regular citizen, right? Cool. But like the issue comes because policing, and as you know, Jason and Mikal and Kristin have all said, policing it's become a shield, right? Policing becomes a fraternity. It becomes like a brotherhood. I have a very close friend of mine whose little brother is a police officer, and then his girlfriend just became a police officer, and he posted a thing. He's like, "Welcome to the family," and I'm like, "The family? Like, that's your job. That's not the family. Like, you're not. This isn't the mafia. Like, you know." But like that's how it's looked at. It's almost like people say bleed blue. Like this is it's like so heavily part of your identity, and then this causes the problem, because then what happens is it's us against them mentality, right? It's the police feel like they're in a war. They feel like we got to protect ourselves against and even to the point of like.
Can I say something a little controversial to that? And this is something that I know that's parallel to something that Jade and Dale have brought up as being military veterans. I don't want to speak for y'all, but you know, the average person enters the military or the police because they do believe, the average person, because they believe that they're doing something that's just, like they're helping people.
I don't disagree with that.
Yeah, but I'm just saying that's what makes this also difficult and complex, because there's definitely some people that are entering that like, I want to fuck some people up.
But then they get indoctrinated.
Right,
yes,
right.
Yeah.
It's just like when you join
adding on to your point.
You join a fraternity because of the grandiose of the fraternity and all of the benefits and things of the fraternity. But then they haze you in, and then you become like sort of like part of this other thing that existed before you got there. Or you
just have to be silent in order. I mean, that's what happened with Serpico. He never was abiding by the thing, but he recognized that he was going to be forcibly removed from said fraternity. I mean, if he spoke up, because there was many police officers that didn't necessarily agree, but they also weren't going to try to actively dismantle it as well.
That's my point, is like, you know, you join, and then you become, if you either swim upstream or swim downstream. Like, you know what I'm saying? So then qualified immunity becomes this larger thing that even if you wanted, I believe there's some police officers, even if they wanted to take responsibility for some of this shit that they did, that they couldn't even, you know? You look at what happened to, was it Akai Garley in Brooklyn when he got shot, and the very first thing I did was to call his lawyer, you know what I'm saying? You know, it's like, I often say this, and like, Dale, I know we had floated the idea of speaking with a cop, and I kind of was like, hoping we did, but it's like, I don't think there's a such thing.
You want to feel comfortable, so I was
no,
like, I'm gonna keep the conversation.
I didn't say that. I said
then.
if I can't say what I would say about policing in front of a cop, then I shouldn't say it at all. But my point is, I don't believe in the idea of good cops, because if there were good cops, the bad ones would be in jail. Like they're the closest people to it. Like I've seen police officers, like like a lot of my evidence is anecdotal, but like it's still real. Like I've seen cops roughing up people unnecessarily and injected myself into the situation, right? And then like a cop started roughing me up, and then his friend had to come to him. He's like, yo, he's not with them. And his friend comes over and talks to me, and he's like, oh, he's going through a rough time and blah. I was like, yo, B, don't talk to me about that. Talk to him about that.
Yeah.
Tell him not to do that. Like, you're the cop. I shouldn't be jumping in and telling him to stop roughing these people up. You should be doing that. You know, and that's the problem. Like, because good cops support the bad ones through this idea of fraternity and this idea of like, yo, we got to have each other's back. But it's like, no, you need to have the public's back. You need to have the citizens' back. You need to make sure that if anybody crosses the line, like, you're the first person. But that's more idealistic, and that's not the way it ever gets facilitated.
Well, I was going to say, I completely agree. I only wanted to add and acknowledge that there are sometimes a few cops who really do put people first. And what happens to them is they get fired.
Right.
That's what happens.
Right.
So they're the good cops, they're unemployed.
Then they're not cops anymore. That's exactly.
Yeah, and effectively
they lose the job.
A lot of times the good cops become the qualified immunity. Like they become the shield so that the rest of the police can get to police.
Have to be they get indoctrinated into the whole.
If you don't get indoctrinated, then like I said, you're fired.
You get removed.
Yeah, you get removed. And that's the system we have set up. And I think the core of it is, I mean, I already said my spiel about a world without police, but in the meantime, I think the core of it is that they don't have to report to the people, which is part of why I call for an ECRB, which would be a community board is elected locally, and that board actually would have firing and suspension power over the local police. Now that's a very controversial policy stance, but to me, that's just logical that if they are supposed to report to the people would have the ability to fire them.
If you're saying that their responsibility is to protect the people, that's also the buzz where you realize, like, you're not here to protect and serve me because you're not beholden to me.
Right.
And that goes back to how we started this conversation, which you brought up, Mikal, is like the facilitation of policing was never to protect and serve the public. It never has been. Like
the jobs program for the KKK. Go ahead.
On top of that, it's to protect property owners. Even to this day, it's to protect wealthy people. It's to protect, it's to make sure the poor aren't where they're supposed. Like, even like policing of homelessness is so crazy because it's like
cruel.
It's not rooted any way at all in solving homelessness or helping the person. It's like, yo, you are ruining the ambiance of the landscape, and we need to get you out of here. Like, you know what I'm saying? What was it, Kristin? You might know, or somebody else might know. There was like this program in New York City where they were like shipping the homeless to Jersey. Like, you know what I'm saying?
I think I heard about this.
They were taking the homeless people in New York City, and they were like sending them to shelters in Jersey just to get them out of the city. And it's like, yo, that's not a solution.
Yeah, my stats might be wrong in this, but if I remember correctly, I think there's something like we're like, and it might be either too low. But if I remember correctly, and forgive me, someone will have to check my stats on this, but like, even if every shelter's filled in New York City, it would still leave something like 13,000 people homeless each night.
Like we don't even have sufficient
That
means to house everyone.
I do not believe that.
I don't believe that either, but I think it's more to do with how real estate is used as money laundering.
Yes.
Oh, well,
Yes.
yeah, that's what I mean. Yes, that's what I mean.
yes.
If we have enough physical space, yes.
Right,
If we
right,
use
right,
the
right.
space we had, yes.
If we use,
Absolutely.
We could actually house the homeless. We have more than enough space.
Right.
And what we should have, to your point, Jason, is a land value tax. And that's a policy I call for too, where we actually tax people who are just like hoarding money because they're just owning property. They're just owning vacant apartments, vacant lots, vacant spaces.
It's part of their financial portfolio. It's an asset.
Yes. And they're just waiting for the value to go up, and the rich people are just sitting on it and chilling with it.
Right.
See, that should be criminal.
That's
Those are
a
the type of
beautiful
things that
policy.
should be criminal.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If you're not physically using this thing that's a part of the quote unquote public, why should you have it?
Right.
We have people that are outside. Yes, Kristen. Anyway.
Especially when you talk about space, right? There's no more space. We're not creating more space. So if you are like hoarding or owning a space that's not used for anything, there definitely should be a tax on that or some sort of like a penalty on that. Because like if you look at it, because I point this out all the time, especially in the middle of a pandemic, is like, yo, who do they expect to live in all of these buildings they built? The entire downtown of Brooklyn is high rises. The lower Manhattan is high rises. The Long Island City is high rises. They're trying to tear down Queensbridge for more high rises. They're trying to, like, you know what I'm saying? It's
They
like,
don't have to fill it to capacity because we don't make them.
And they're getting tax breaks on it later.
Let me just add this. Y'all brought up something about the noise thing, you know, and neighbors and stuff. A lot of times what happens, and I found this to be the case with a lot of the, you know, middle-class New Yorkers that I know, they're not used to people living near them in that same building because a lot of those apartments are vacant. So the fact that they can even hear somebody else, like it's an apartment building with 50 units in it, and there's 12 people living in the building.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Right.
I always found it weird.
And then they're not always there either, right? Like only when they're in town.
Even on my block, they rent these apartments and they got a house someplace else.
Right.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I've always found it weird. You know, I'm not from New York City originally. I was born in New Jersey, but I've lived in New York City for 21 years, and I opted to come here. And I've always found it odd when I found people that come here and they have an issue with noise. Because I'm like, you live in one of the largest metropolitan areas in the world.
Yeah, for real.
Which in a condensed space, we're not an urban sprawl like you say DC is or Los Angeles is. We don't have this huge suburban. We are condensed in an island, right? So like, listen. And I said,
I complain about the noise. I'd be like, I'm tired of hearing neighbors.
Right, and you from South Carolina, where you got like hundreds of acres on either side of your house. That's
right. When I'm tired of the noise, I need to move outside of the city.
Right, and
New York should not change for me. Like
I grew up in a house full of people. I just like I sleep like whatever's going on. I just sleep. Like you know what I'm saying. I developed this as a necessity. That's like yo B. You live
and don't get me wrong too. Like 4 a.m, if you screaming at the top of your lungs at 4 a.m, you need to chill.
Right.
Like that's just common decency.
I mean, yes, but no. Like so my last place before this,
yeah, you a New Yorker.
I lived. Hold on. So this like I moved into an apartment on Lincoln Place off of Schenectady, right off of Eastern Parkway, right? Yeah. So it's like I'm ground floor. My windows where I slept right outside was the front of the building, and motherfuckers treated that like it was the spot. Like
that's a living room.
I think I am positive that there is a tournament of dice games in Brooklyn, and that spot was one of the spots because they. And the pandemic only made it worse. Like motherfuckers didn't have to go to work 24/7. So like, and so obviously, like, you know, there'd be times where I'm trying to sleep at 3 o'clock in the morning and there's literally a party outside my window. And of course I'm upset and I'm frustrated, but I'm like, yo, what do I do? Do I call the cops on people?
Yo, I saw that. I saw that.
But like these people like have probably lived on this block their entire lives. Like this is probably like a ritual for them that they've been doing since they were who knows how long, right? And I just moved there like 2 years ago.
It's not about you. Yeah.
Right. And I'm upset by it. But do I expect everything to change because I chose to move in an apartment like there? And no, I don't. Like,
But the new answer is yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's why we call them colonizers.
Right. And my thing was like, I'd rather move.
That's respect. That's reverence and respect. And we've been missing that. I mean, there's been in Harlem, I mean, you'll know this, Jason, because you're near Marcus Garvey Park. There was a whole controversy over the drummers because the drummers in the park were disturbing new white people who had moved in, who
didn't know the culture.
The noise is too bad. And it's like, culturally, we've been having these drummers here for years. This is just like part of the.
This is what we do, right?
Yeah,
right.
This is what you signed up for.
Yes.
Well, and see, like
neighborhood, expecting the whole character of the neighborhood to change for you.
Well, but that's colonialism.
They do. But you know what? And I will say there's a culture in New York City that is more like, I think that's a New York City thing, because like in New York City, changing your apartment is almost like changing your wardrobe, right? Like people get different people. I've known people who've been in this city 3 years and probably have had 3 different apartments, right? Like it's not a huge.
I don't think white folks move that much. Honestly.
But I mean, but
we do that because that's But I don't, you know.
It's out of
the people who are complaining don't move that much.
So, but
because they came here with their trust fund or whatever.
But this is also what they don't do, right? So, but this is my point. Like, if you were really rooted in staying where you're at, if you really think you had a right to stay there, get to know your neighbors, right? Like, how many times has anybody knocked on your door and be like, "Yo, I'm so and so, I just moved in, blah blah blah, yada yada yada," right? Because if that really was a practice, then somebody could be like, "Oh, the drummers, oh they just do that," right? Like, you know. But like in New York City, because even I had to that was part of my, like when I was talking about the people, like I had 2 options. One is move, and the other one was to go outside and talk to them, right? Those are the only 2 options that like really make sense with my code of ethics. So it's like I had to check myself. It was like, how often have I done that? How often have I introduced myself to my neighbors? How often have I, like, you know, got to know the community that I lived in? You know what I'm saying?
Well, so I got a story.
Sorry, deliberately. How often have I deliberately got to know the community?
Well, I was going to say, and it's funny you said that, because so like I said, I've lived in New York City for 21 years. My first apartment I lived in for 6. My second apartment I lived in for 4. The one we just moved from, I lived in for 10. Within the first year of my first apartment, I made it real clear, and I lived in a smaller building, but I made sure the block, anybody that I ran into in the bodega, like, it wasn't even on some like Guy Smiley suburban thing. I would just talk, like kick it, like mention the music. We see somebody with sports. Like one of the things I loved about living in Flatbush was, so America's like American football. I play soccer, which is football in the rest of the world. Yeah, right. So I'm in a neighborhood where they see my Dortmund hat, they see Chelsea.
And they knew what team he was going for.
Right. So now I'm talking about Barca. I'm talking about like we're just kicking it. We're neighbors. We're homies, right? So to your point, I've definitely had conversations early on when I was in Park Slope, where my neighbor literally told me after I was there for like 2 years, he's like, "I got to tell you something, and I'm going to be honest with you." He's like, "My name isn't such and such. It's actually Mike." And I was like, "What?" He's like, "Yeah, man. The reason why I told you a different name is because you moved in here, and what I found out, everybody in that building, they were a minimum of second generation. Some of those people have been there for 3 generations.
Their mama had the apartment before them.
They were telling us about the people who lived in our apartment before us. They were like, "Oh yeah, all these apartments used to be one apartment, and this was the family, and blah 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 blah." Even the exterminator.
Right. The thing is, they don't expect you to stay.
Right. And that's exactly what this brother told me when I was in Park Slope. And he's like, "Well, once I saw that you were here past 8 months, and then you're here past a year, and you were who you were, I realized like I had to be real with you." So like I had conversations with people in my neighborhoods to the point that when one of my roommates had moved in later on, when her bike got stolen, we didn't call the cops. I literally went to my homies on the stoop, and I was like, "Yo, check this out, y'all."
This is the bike we're looking for.
No, yeah. I was like, "Listen, this is what happened. I'm not calling the cops. I'm not placing blame. I'm not saying any of y'all did. I'm just letting you know the bike that was in the hallway that got boosted, that was from my apartment. So if you just know anything, just let me know. Like that's it. And I'm not calling the cops or nothing. Like if the bike comes back, but just let you know, like basically that was my bike." Like, a word. Within 2 weeks, not only was the bike back, but we were like, "So this so-and-so, this is this dude that basically is an addict. He didn't," and it's like his friend came over, he was hanging out with us one night and he saw that it was in there and he came back. I I don't need to hear it. I was like, I don't need to know all that. I'm like, thank you, I appreciate you. That's it. Like, but I had that conversation only because I lived there long enough and I was not what they were typically used to, which was like, I tell people, I used to get stuff all the time and I'm like, yo, you know what? You can be Black and be a gentrifier. It's not about your race.
Definitely.
It's literally about, are you willing to be a part of the fabric of what the community is? And every place I've ever been, I'm like, you know what? I don't have to be everybody's friend, but I need to say hi. I need to open doors. I need to be friendly. If people are asking questions, I need to act like they exist, because at some point, I might step on some toes. They might step on my toes. We should have that talk.
Before we start getting into, because I feel like everyone has more they want to say about this issue, but we only have a couple more questions left.
Come on.
And I'm going to try. We've been sitting here for quite some time.
We have.
Like people starting to get hungry.
Jason got his gallon of water. He here for it. Jason got his gallon of water. He pulled up. He's like, let's rock and roll.
Come on.
I was going to say, this is great, but I am going to have to start wrapping up. I have a 6 p.m. and I'm going to try to get a break in between this and that.
Okay.
Real quick. And I guess you can pick one or the other, or just quickly answer these questions, because one of them is kind of lofty still, but I wanted to to present the question. But how do you imagine community policing? And we already kind of talked about, we already gave out a couple ideas, right, in our various conversations. So that's one question that can be a little lofty. And what steps can we take to have more conversations like this with larger communities, with the more general community? So not just a panel on a podcast, but like a public forum, wherever. What are the steps that y'all think we can take? And you can pick one or the other, or just,
I'm a shotgun and step,
but very short.
I promise, 30 seconds, I'm a shotgun and step off. I think the only way you can have these conversations, these difficult conversations, is through education. I think it's got to start in some way, shape, form, or fashion with and for young people and go from there and span out. I think that it's too difficult to have those conversations. My therapist said this to me on Friday. If you are from a culture where you don't have difficult conversations with people that you even know, how can we expect you to have difficult conversations with abject strangers? So the one thing is that when we have a kind of education and young people tend to be more open. So I think it's got to start there. In terms of community policing, I think there's two things that we have to think about. We have to think about mental health, and we have to think about finance. I think if we have things in place, therapists, social workers, and then thinking about how to decriminalize things based around finance, I think that's a place we can start. Similar to what Jason was talking about in his experience in travels, is that what we need to do is the most violent issues should get, if they have to at this point, get a violent response. Everything else, there are mitigating ways and de-escalating ways, and we have some of those things in place already that we just don't implement or we consider a part of policing. If we take a serious look at mental health and we take a serious look at decriminalizing things on a financial level, that's what community policing looks like, along with Kristin's initiative about making that body completely beholden to and in service of and responsible to the community at large that lives in those respective places, and make that a law and make that something that has to be concretely abided by.
Yes.
I would like to basically just support all of that with, I would love to see police basically downgrade in terms of their level of violence, in that say, okay, we're police, that means we don't carry arms. We're all trained in martial arts. We're all, we have to pass physical exams. I think if you're gonna be a cop, should nobody be able to outrun you?
Let them
know.
Yep.
Right.
No.
Like if you're supposed to, if you're supposed to be somebody, you're supposed to be a sentinel or a constable or whatever.
Have some discipline.
Yeah. Right. Because a lot of times they shooting at people who can outrun them. And so I'm like, if you can't run a 5-minute mile, you're not disciplined enough to be a cop.
Yeah, because physical discipline and mental discipline are tied.
Are tied, absolutely.
Yeah, they're tied.
So if on the way to abolishing police, I think that should be one of the criteria, just your physical fitness and your wellness. In terms of how we have those conversations, I agree. It starts with education. I think we would have to basically sack the educational apparatus to just write rewrite a lot of this stuff because they telling their kids lies too.
Okay with it.
Yeah. I mean, they're not, these folks are not honest with their kids about what they're actually doing for a job. I mean, the last
Jason, we should get into something, brother. You and I should get into something.
Yeah, I'm down. I mean,
the
last conversation I had with a cop was someone I grew up with. And he was explaining to me, his motivation. And he had basically started off as a, DC in the 80s and 90s was quite liberal and Afrocentric and all of that, but Maryland and Virginia are quite conservative, right? And so, I said, look, man, you draw a wage enslaving people and killing the ones you don't enslave. Like, what do we have in common? He said, well, at least we understand each other.
Wow.
I mean, I think that's where the conversation starts, right? Like even just acknowledging all the positions and all the views, even if you don't agree with the views.
I think the
just
difference
saying
is,
like, this is how this group of people see me, or this is how I'm perceived.
Like, bro, you work for a terrorist organization. What we gonna talk about?
You sound like a Sith Lord, bro.
I'm saying.
He just did it like, well, I'm glad you realize what my purpose is.
Right. Difference is one of you sees this as a problem and the other one doesn't.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah. Go ahead.
In my perspective, I think, we spend a lot of time looking at the staircase, and I think we need to just like focus on the first step, right? And by that, I mean like, as I get older, I kind of my idealism is just as vibrant, but it's kind of like focused on a smaller circumference, I suppose. So now I'm looking at things like, the garbage collection on my street and how the garbage men are kind of like flippant on how they collect the garbage, right? I'm looking at like street lights that have been out for as long as I've lived on the block. I'm looking at like trash cans that don't get collected as much, or corners, like so many corners without a trash can being there. And I'm like, who's responsible for all of this, right? And it's like, I'm responsible for all of this. Like the people who live in the community are responsible for all of this.
And your government.
No. But who holds?
They've already paid for that. Go ahead.
No, okay. Yeah. When I say who's responsible, I mean we have to hold them accountable. Like, how do these problems get solved? They don't get solved by me going on Facebook and posting a status about it. They don't get solved with me like complaining about it left and right. It gets solved with like grassroots organizing, or like meeting my neighbors and being like, yo, isn't this fucking crazy? And then like collectively doing something about it, which is like
representative like Kristin.
Yeah.
Your
representatives
doing the community cleanup.
Facts.
I mean, we've done some of those in Harlem with the parks, and I mean that's real. Just the community picking up the trash.
And I guess my point is like when you focus on the first step or those little steps, it often leads to the larger steps. Just naturally, like that's the natural progression. First, you want your block to be clean, then you want your block to be safe. Then you know what I'm saying. And a lot of those problems are connected, right? Like blocks that are less tended to, people feel more valid and disrespecting in certain ways, like so it's like I think getting off the internet and getting in the streets is a way to create all of those changes.
And when you say in the streets, because a lot of people have been tying that phrase to like protesting or rioting or whatever you want to call it. You mean like being in person,
and
talking to people on your block.
I don't mean going to protest. I don't mean going this. I mean like in your actual community with the people that you live around, organizing with them to raise your standards of living.
Yes. Yeah. I agree.
I definitely agree with that. The cleaning up. I mean, the reason I was saying your local government is because that's also a city council issue, and people get on me about it because they're like, oh, cops are killing people. And I'm like, yes, that's true. But we're also in the midst of psychological warfare. And there is also an effect emotionally and psychologically with the trash in our communities. So when I say over 250 trash cans were stolen from District 9 Central Harlem, that's the truth. And that's not nothing.
And it matters.
Those cans matters. The cut in sanitation budget matters. The fact that we get less trash pickups than downtown matters.
Matters.
That's relevant. That's
You ever see the trash cans downtown? Some of them have like the neighborhood on it. It'd be like such and such, like
very
you know what I'm saying?
electronic.
Yo,
They talk to you when you put garbage in your
Yeah. You're already like compressing my trash. I just put my coffee cup in. Like it's already like making noise. Like
not in the hood. Yo. Sometimes I'll be on a hunt to find a trash can because you know.
Yeah.
Yo, it is crazy. When I was younger, I just threw trash wherever you take the wrapper off or something and it goes in the ground. And then one day somebody was like, yo, why? And I never considered it. It's kind of just like the way that the environment I grew up in. And I was like, word. So now I never do it. But now I never do it, like finding a trash can sometimes in like the hood be a mission.
Every time I clean out my purses, I have a bunch of wrappers in them from me, like just buying a honey bun while I'm running to a class and I couldn't find a trash can. So I just stuck it in my purse or I stuck it in my pocket. It's really ridiculous.
Yeah, no, it definitely is. I mean, to bring it back to policing, I did want to just say, and I said this before, but when we have conversations about community policing or where to go or what to do next, I always want to try to frame them in terms of accountability and frame them in terms of systems, because we have a systemic problem. And I think sometimes when we start talking about policing, people want to get on this police community relations and we should have a barbecue. And you know, the cops need to have a
the salsa band of only cops and all,
and it's like, no.
That's what's wrong. They're not playing basketball enough. That's what it is.
We have a systemic problem. We need a systemic solution. So who cops actually report to and what mechanism we have for accountability and what's going to happen. I mean, so as long as we can keep conversations focused on that so we don't get lost.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Sure. Jade, do you have an opinion you would like to share? I haven't forced you to talk this time, but
shout out to Jade, who has been
very patient.
No. I mean, I just figured that like I'm here listening more than talking, because I feel like, I don't know, if we're gonna really be about, I don't know, being supportive for Black people, I want to listen and take it in and not talk sometimes. And I feel like a lot of people try to talk when really they should not. So I don't know. Personally, I joined the military because, I did want to do good and be a good person. I thought that this would be great. I did know going in, it was the biggest, baddest gang in the world. I didn't go in like not knowing history. I went in there like knowing all about a lot of things, but I wanted to see it for myself and be like, is it really like this? And if I can be in the room, maybe, and I never really saw anything, personally, but that doesn't mean that I don't believe that it doesn't, that it doesn't happen. I see it in other situations, but that's one of the reasons why I feel like maybe I'm not the best person to talk to in this situation, because I don't have those personal experiences. And so maybe in this conversation, you guys can take it.
Yeah. But thank
Appreciate
you
you, Jade.
Cool.
Well, and I think that highlights too. It's just tough, right? Because we aren't talking about some amorphous, ambiguous thing. It's like you grew up with the police officer that you talked to, Jason Baxter. You had a friend who became a police officer. I told you at the beginning of this show, my mother served in the corrections department for 35 years in the only prison in New Jersey where they still have the death penalty. And she ran the sex offenders unit for about the last 15 years of her 36 years of working in the corrections. We're all in some way, shape, form, or fashion know and or a part of some of these things that are oppressive, that are systems, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the individuals that we know they are complicit, so they have some part, but it's not as simple as just saying that, because we as human beings are very complex, right? And it is so, but the difficulty is how do we have that conversation to think about, because ultimately at the end of the day, you have to believe, or I think you have to believe, if we all just want to get to a place where everyone is, and that's where I'm coming from, where everybody's good, then there has to be some way that we can kind of do that with the majority of people. And those that aren't on that, well, then that's a different discussion on where they may have to kind of end up or land. But there's probably a lot of people somewhere in that middle that, whether it's miseducation or misinformation or really just fear of not having, fear of whatever, those things maybe can be worked on. And I think that's what's tough. So we have to find a way to have a conversation that's, I know we kind of debunked this term, but like this idea of like, I talk with my friends about politics, and like, a lot of times when you have conversations with the conservative side of things, it's like, it's not an argument in good faith. It's like you're coming from a position where the thing isn't true. You don't have anything to back that up. And you're actively engaging parts of the discussion that's not even being discussed. So we're not actually having a real dialogue where, even in this conversation, we're pretty much 99% on with each other. But there's definitely things where we're like, well, I'm not really on that side, or like, I'm a little bit over here. But because we're in good faith in this conversation, we can see where the other points are coming from. Like, okay, so I see where your position is. I can see where these things might overlap, or, okay, I can acknowledge that that's a thing, but I'm still going to say, but I need it to be this way. But we're also acknowledging, well, the information you're bringing and providing is based on experience. It's based on real data. And it's not deviating from what the actual point is. And I think that's the only way people can learn and you can have dialogue. You can completely not be on the same side of things. But if you're coming from that sort of kind of just place, you can begin to have hard conversation and have that learning. And I think that's the biggest challenge that we face as adults right now in the political spectrum that we're in. Too many of these conversations, like even when we were all talking about that question, was like some of the question, like, it sounds like you already kind of have a predisposed, but you already know the answer is. Right. And it's almost like you're asking a question to like trip us up, like, see, it's like, that question is already crazy a little. You've already assumed some things that aren't real in that. So now I'm responding to that as opposed to responding to the core of the question, but, we got to figure this out. Basically.
On an educational point, Mikal, I find it really, this has been my experience, and one of the things I struggle with a lot is early education, but college, high school, better. The younger they get, the harder it is for me, in my skill set.
I'm saying.
But
Dale's the babies. Dale can do the babies.
So I want to know when is the right time to start teaching a person how to reject the premise of a thing.
Can I be honest with you? My personal experience, in my semi-expert opinion, 5th grade.
Okay.
It can start with kindergarten. It can start with pre-K.
I agree.
Like rejecting a thing, like all you have to do is ask someone. Like if we're talking, like let's say we're talking about stealing indigenous land, like we can relate that to glue. That's true. Would you be okay if Susie over here took your glue, Marcus, without asking? It's like, no, would you be okay if she sat in your seat? And it's just like relating it to like everyday items that they would see, because at the end of the day, it is more about like respect and not seeing a lot of this is about respect for other people in your community and not seeing them as a part of your community, right?
Okay.
Seeing yourself or yourself or your family as like the only thing that matters, and not thinking that what you're doing is affecting the people around you, like the greater community. That's what a lot of this is. And a lot of our society is based on the I.
Right.
It's based on the self.
I was going to say thank you for putting that out, Dale, because I think Jason might be the only parent on this particular podcast.
Okay.
But you might have experienced, because you're absolutely right, Dale, because I feel like the most just human beings I think I've ever met are little ones. They're very clear in like why this isn't right and why this shouldn't happen.
Yeah. And it's not up for debate. Like that's the end of it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I was explained redlining
good sense of that.
using cookies.
Yeah.
Like I was in a workshop at Dreamyard, and they gave they gave everyone in like a white t-shirt a cookie. And then everyone who was wearing colored t-shirts or something other than white t-shirt got 2 cookies.
Yeah.
And then they put like certain people in certain places, and they were like, so now since you're in this place, you don't get that extra cookie, even though you were, that's how they explained redlining. It was like, bitch, I want my cookie.
Them kids was upset. It was
That-
like, this is, he was like, this
There's
is
no one at
injustice.
any age level who's not going to understand that.
I didn't land on Fraggle Rock.
That's a famous exercise like that
The blue eye.
Jane Elliott did that.
Yep.
That same one. I want to relate a very quick story. When my son was probably in 4th grade, because I find a lot of the oppression happens. You mentioned my being a parent. I have a 12-year-old now. I have a 20-year-old as well. But for my 12-year-old, like I had to show up a lot on his behalf, because the degree to which Black boys have to advocate for themselves is frankly cruel. Like there, he would have to be some sort of savant to, without me, do all of what he had to do to survive elementary school. I get a phone call, Mr. Marshall, we need to see you. And what happened, they had called my wife, and we had already told the school, I'm usually around during the day. So if anything pops up, just call me, because I'll be there in a few minutes. They always call her because they feel like that'll be an easier conversation to have, right?
Of course.
Than with me. Really what happened, they called her and she called me. And I get there, where's Mrs. Marshall? I'm like, what you mean? I'm here, I'm the parent. What's the problem? And I see my son crying, kind of like in the little staging area where they let the kids out, right? And I said, well, what happened? She said, well, Jason hit one of the students, and we don't tolerate violence. I said, well, what happened? I know you saying he hit somebody. So what happened? Because this happened during your watch. So you're responsible for what happened, because these are all children. These are not adults, right? Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden she was stuttering and all this kind of stuff. She said, well, someone took something out of his bag, and he found out, he saw the kid with whatever this thing was, and he thought he went over and struck the child. I said, wait a minute, ma'am, you facilitated a robbery? She goes, well, I wouldn't quite put it like that, but I said, no, I'm gonna put it like that, because that's my child. You facilitated a robbery and then criminalized the response to an active robbery, and you calling me about this? She says, well, I'm sorry, I didn't think. I said, wait, hold on. I'm having to advocate for a child, and you're using him to. I said, where's the thief? Oh, well, they went home. I said, wait a minute. We can't even adjudicate this effectively, because you facilitated a robbery in a public institution. She was just like, oh, and
she went in the corner and started crying.
But the amount of times I had to show up as a parent, just because and really half the time I didn't have to do anything. If I was there, it would go differently.
Like the story that happened recently. What's the musician's name with his son?
Keon.
Yeah. Right.
He's one of my classmates.
Right. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah. But again, and then even in that moment, everyone was working on behalf of that white woman.
Of course.
Well, because we're the greatest threat to everyone.
I mean,
all the time.
That's a whole other podcast.
That is.
Yeah, we're not gonna do that. Sorry.
Yo.
That sounds like a whole nother hour we could be talking.
Yo, for sure.
So let's not even, we tipped our toe in the water, and let's just leave the toe there. All right. So thank y'all so much for coming on the podcast and sharing your experiences and your
thank y'all for having me.
Knowledge.
Thank
you
you
so much.
Thank you for doing this.
Mikal, Baxter, Jason, Kristin, Jade, thank you so much. This has been the Poet Podcast with Dale Novella. Thank you everyone for listening and for your questions, and we will see you next month.
All right now.
Yeah.
You guys are good. Can I get a round of applause for the band? This is the No Name Band. They don't have a name until I name them every month. I often always forget to name them though. Say it again. Segway. Sandwich. Savory. Oh, gotcha. Zabric, yes. We'll get to that later tonight. How are you, sir? You having a good time? Okay. Well, you know, have another drink at this delightful bar, and your time will get exponentially better. How many people are out tonight to have a good time? Make some noise. That's right. We're all here to have a good time. And who's gonna help you have a good time better than you? Who's gonna love you better than you? Huh? Nobody. That's right, yeah. Who's gonna love you better than you? Nobody. That's right. I said, who's gonna love you better than you? Nobody. That's right, yo. Who's gonna love you better than you? Yeah. I'd be like, yeah, who gonna love you better than you? And outside love better than self never been true. You couldn't do it. Gotta find the love within. Yeah, they say that love is a sin, but that's not true. Yeah, I've been loving with the saints. They was like Baxter, love and anger, that's what it ain't. Sometimes love could change like $1 when it break, it makes change. Pardon me, I'm just getting ready, getting set up. They was like, yo, Baxter, knock it down, but then get up. They was like, I really like your get up. On the stage, watch them step up. This will be the poet, you know we gonna televise it. You gonna see some dope acts. Don't be surprised when somebody comes up on stage and starts prophesizing. Then it's a good time you haven't, you just realized it. Open up your eyes, kid. Yeah, you can see it. Baxter Wordsworth. In between the lines where I'm reading, they was like, damn, I could burn like a phoenix, a genius. Plus I'm coming back like I'm Jesus. Yeah. Shout out to the band, they be killing it. Let me introduce them cause they real as shit. You can put your hands in the air if you feeling it. You can put your hands by your side if you kinda chillin' shit. But yeah, you know on the roster, the one on the keys is Simone Acosta. Yeah, you know she gonna freaking rock it, messing with the keys like a locksmith. They was like, okay. Plus in the pace, you know we got Greek, he be strumming on the bass. You can feel it, yo, it's all up in your face. Please seat feel seated, they're up in the place. Wait a minute. And that ain't just that. Up in the back, you know where it's at. We got the ones on the percussion, his name is Snacks. Everything he do, it could never be whack now. Last but not least, I shouldn't say it. It's the one and only, her name is Jade. She's always in the place when we be in the place. Yes, never basic. And for what it's worth, I should introduce myself, Baxter Wordsworth. I've been dope ever since the day of my birth, until the day I return. Back up in the dirt, they was like, yo, Baxter, you could come in first. Matter of fact, yo, make sure that you rehearse. I don't know, wait a minute, hold on. And that is just the power I exert. I'm looking at the light, trying to find the lines that connect them. They was like, yo, Baxter, it's an interception. They could feel it in their breath, yeah, it's so refreshing. Grab a microphone and started blessing. Coming to your rescue. Chilling on the bottom like a vestibule. All up in the attic, they be blessing who. They was like, they see him and they got him. I'm like Bruce Wayne, late nights, running over Gotham. Baxter words have been a problem. Plus, you do the math and that is how you solve it. I melt it down like it's a solvent. They was like, hold up, let's revolve it. Put your hands in the sky if you feeling the vibe. This is the poet will be televised. Put your hands in the sky if you feeling the vibe. This is the poet will be televised. Put your hands in the sky if you feeling the vibe. This is the poet will be televised. Put your hands by your side, you feeling the vibe. This is the poet will be televised. Break it down, break it down, break it down, break it down.